Evan Giddings, Steven Risotto in studio, and the fantastic Jake Hutchinson joining us, sitting in for Dan Devone for the next 3 hours from 9 to noon. What's going on, everyone? What's going on, Jake? How we feeling, my man?
Feeling good. We got some Warriors to talk. It's going to be a interesting week to recap here. They've been having some weird. They're just a weird team, man. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, the Golden State purgatories. It feels like it's kind of where they've been stuck, right? Yeah, I don't know how you feel about this because, look, you cover the Niners for us. You do a fantastic job. You also cover the Warriors. You can go check out all of Jake's work on Odyssey's website. And look, it's like, you never want to be right where the Warriors have been seemingly for the last, 2.5 seasons, right? They're 19-19. They're tied in 9th with Sacramento, but they're just stuck in the middle. And it doesn't feel like there's anything, at least for, the remaining, month of January that's going to change that drastically. Outside of maybe getting healthy, I don't know if there's another piece out there. But before we get into all the trade machinations, before we get into some of the spicy quotes that we got from earlier this week and the Warriors as a whole, just kind of where are you at with them right now? Because everyone wants to be great or be terrible, and the Warriors seem to be unable to do either.
Well, that's the thing. I think in life, especially in sports specifically, the worst place to be is square in the middle, right? It's just hard because you don't have a clear direction. And it's just hard to stomach that where you're like, what are we? And you can sort of make an argument in either direction. You're like, actually, we're really good. We just need a couple pieces together. I think that is sort of, people are giving up on that idea with this Warriors team. But there's no clear direction. When you're terrible, you're saying, all right, we're young. We're gonna rely on these young guys. We're going to build for the future. But the Warriors with Steph and with Draymond, you're clinging to these dying embers of a dynasty. And you're like, we got to get Steph the last chip. But I think there's a realization and understanding that might just not even be possible. Like, how many moves can you make with the new salary cap, which is something that's not sexy, but it is the reality of you used to be able to do a lot more and be more flexible with moves. And people go get Jimmy Butler. It's like, all right, well, you can trade 6 players, and then you're going to have 3 old guys who can't get through the season. That doesn't really solve your problem. So they're in this uncomfortable middle ground of what are we? And Steph earlier this week was basically I don't know. You saw it. It's this existential dread of the middle ground.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned the aprons. The apron era to me, I don't know if it started off well, and I personally blame C.J. McCollum for this because he's the president of the Players Association. Agreed.
They did a terrible job
to this madness. Yeah, if you're a player, your price floor is being suppressed as we speak. But the thing about it is I don't know necessarily how much it helps the NBA. I think it came in a really poor time for the Warriors because they're stuck with albatrosses and they're also an aging team. So the only players that you can really pair successfully with older players are other older players who have been grandfathered into this new age with a bunch of massive money that you don't want to pay to a 34 or 35-year-old. But back before the apron was a thing, it was just about how big of a check you could cut. And the Warriors didn't necessarily seem to be afraid to cut that check. Even last year, yes, they paid the most exorbitant tax bill in the history of basketball. And they cut wages this year, but it was because they were literal consequences for it. Now it's in the NBA, it just feels like player movement or star player movement, it's going to become drastically more difficult. And I realize that it might help some of the, some of the homegrown teams.
Yeah.
But overall, what makes the NBA great in my mind is the drama and all the movement that's possible out there. And it feels like if this was a deadline, say, 5 years ago, Jimmy Butler would be gone.
Oh, no question about it.
And all of these other players, maybe it's Zion or other big names that we're talking about, would be on the move, and somebody would be getting fleeced, and we'd be talking about this team versus that team, and the Warriors might legitimately have a chance to be in the mix. But because of what age we live in, that's just not, it doesn't really feel either realistic or teams are still hesitant to really dive into it.
Right. And the Warriors, because of how injured they are and because of, starting the season where we're doing, 13, 14 people are all involved, you're using so many different pieces. You still don't have a clear idea of what works, if there is something that works. And at this point, it feels like if the Warriors don't get a hot shooting night from Buddy Hield or Dennis Schroeder, they don't really have a chance. And they like survived one with Curry going ice cold the other night.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you look at them matching up against any team pretty much, except for like the bottom of the barrel teams. And you just look and you're like, I don't feel like they should have a shot in this game. Like every time I've watched them line up against the Minnesota Timberwolves, physically they're outmatched. They just don't have the talent to match up. And it's like they've got some crafty guys. They can slow the game down and play good defense. But like they don't have any sort of consistent recipe. And I think that's sort of what Steph got at earlier this week. It's like if you're going to make a move, like, yeah, Vucevic is a guy I think we'll talk about as this show goes on. If Chicago, which is like a stubbornly like does not trade very often team, even decides to do something like that. But it's hard for them outside of like a stretch five to be like, what can even make us a contender? And I think that's the frustration where you're like, what do we do? And you're just stuck in this reality that because of this new CBA, you might be stuck knowing this is our team and we're just going to be really mediocre and hope something clicks.
Yeah, I mean, I threw out the word of the month, which is just endure last week. Like, you kind of have to endure this stretch. And that's why, like, I know that it wasn't pretty by any means. And last night, I actually did enjoy the fight that the Warriors put together. You know, it's not a game that you're going to lock in and say, oh, you know, I want to see 20 minutes of Pat Spencer and I got to see what Quentin Post is doing. Although he is, I don't know, maybe
they were kind of fun
player. Yeah, but the fact that they were able to fight against a pretty whole Indiana Pacers group that is playing good basketball themselves, like, that's the kind of effort that they're going to need every night. It doesn't mean they're going to win because talent and cream eventually will rise to the top, but you get a victory that's needed against the Pistons, though you almost threw it away. You fight against Indiana. Of course, you got at least a couple of days between now and Toronto on Monday. Like, that's what Warriors basketball, I hate to break it to people, is going to look like, at least until the end of the month, at least until you start to get some of these pieces back, because, I mean, they only had 10 guys in a uniform yesterday.
Yeah, and I think that last night, for those of you who watched, which, I mean, good on you for sticking with them in a game where there's no Steph, no Draymond, no Wiggins, no Kuminga, no Pods, and they fought. And I think it reminded me a little bit of when they played the Nets, when the Nets had Schroeder and Schroeder killed them. But the Nets had a bunch of like truly random guys out there just playing really hard. And I think an unstated reality of the NBA is that most of the time guys are going like 70, 75% in the regular season until like the clutch minutes, because that's kind of how you have to sustain, and that's reality. But when you have guys who are desperate and young out there like Guy Santos and Pat Spencer who are going 100% the entire time, that can level the playing field a little bit just because they are desperate. They're willing to change the speed of the game, and other teams are like, what are you doing? Like, we have this unspoken agreement that we're going to go like 70% for the first three quarters. What are we doing here? And that'll at least let you be competitive and hang around in some games that, you know, if you're missing pieces, maybe you don't belong. At least make it interesting and make it tougher on teams who are expecting to just blow you out of the building. And as unsexy as effort is, like, sometimes that's what matters for a team that doesn't have the dudes.
Yeah, exactly. 888-957-9570 is the number if you want to get on the Warriors this week from 9 to noon every Saturday here on 95.7 The Game. That voice you just heard is Jake Hutchinson filling in for Dan Devone. Evan Giddings with you as always. From the 510 chiming in, the Warriors, to be honest, just need to shoot average three-point percentage. They're going to win a lot of games. The problem is they've been shooting 15 to 20% the last 10 to 15. You know, it's funny, like, the way that they've been playing. I remember when Mark Jackson was head coach, and people have varying, I don't know, ideas of who Mark Jackson was as a head coach. I think he did a pretty good job. But he had this go-to line whenever the Warriors would lose a game. And he would just say, well, it's a make-or-miss league. And it's like, at the time, I was like, this is the biggest cop-out I've ever heard in my life. Like, oh, yeah, we just didn't make shots tonight. But now, fast forward to 2024, 25, and that's who the Warriors are. If they make shots, even sometimes if they make shots, they won't win. But it's like they have so many streaky shooters, like players. I mean, even like a Schroeder who they bring in, and then people have come to the realization he's a streaky player. Buddy Hield is the definition of a streaky player. Lindy Waters III, though he's been shooting it better, is a streaky shooter. If those guys don't hit shots, even Moses Moody to some extent is a streaky shooter. If Steph's not on the floor like last night, and even when he is, They just have so many guys that could go 1 for 8 or 6 for 8, not all at the same time like they were doing the first 15 games. That I do agree with you, 5-1-0. They just need to shoot average. But the problem is they find the average in extremes. Like one game they will shoot 55% and one game they will shoot 20%. And they're going to lose the game when they shoot 20%. The question is it going to come against a Pistons team? Is it going to come against a Cavaliers team? Is it going to come against the Sixers, who they blew out, during the homestand because they shot 60% from three? So yes, overall, if I told you the Warriors' numbers, you'd actually be surprised at how middle of the pack they feel, even though they've been really bad over their last 20, 25 games. But unfortunately, on a night-to-night basis, when you watch them, you're like, God, this is just feast or famine.
I know, and it's funny. I was thinking about, the game they won this week against Detroit, and it was like, oh, well, Buddy Hield crossed the 18-point threshold. It's a win. They still have not lost a game when Buddy Hield scores at least 18 points.
That's pretty cool.
Which is just wild. But that's the reality. Like, you cannot count on Buddy Hield to produce like that. And when he does, okay, you're probably good. And Schroeder, he came through for them in those final minutes when they almost chucked it away and Steph had nothing in the tank, and they started to do the thing where they get high on their own supply and just have bad turnovers, and Guy Santos is feeling himself and tries to pass one between the legs to Steph, and Steph almost had a conniption on the court. But, that's the reality. When you acquire a guy like Schroeder, and you're kind of hoping he can come in and steady that second unit and take some of the ball handling responsibility off Steph, but it's in an offense, that's not the offense that matches his style. He likes to slow it down, isolate and penetrate and sort of just take over that way. And the Warriors are this motion offense that doesn't really fit his vibe. And I think that's part of the reason, he's given them so much trouble is because he's a different sort of pace guy. And we'll see how that evolves throughout the year if he gets his touch back. But you're right. They're relying on a lot of these guys who are super streaky. And sure, if it all comes together and you get Buddy Hield and Lindy Waters, and Schroeder all shooting at the same time, great. They can do a lot of things, but it feels unlikely that that's ever going to be a consistent recipe that they can rely on.
Yeah, and I think the 5-1 also hits on a good point. It's it's a major issue that they're dependent on the three, and that's because and Kerr, Kerr's honestly been going through a lot emotionally. Obviously, he lost his childhood home in the Pacific Palisades, and prayers and thoughts out to everyone down in Southern California. But and I don't know if that was kind of the reason behind his frustration after the loss to Miami. In addition to obviously the performance, there's other stuff going on. But he just laid it all out there. He's like, well, we're one of the worst teams in terms of layups and free throws. So the Warriors don't get the easiest shots that you want, and they're streaky on making the most valuable shot in basketball, which is the three. That's not an equation for success offensively. And we knew that they were always going to be offensively challenged. But the fact that they're unable to get much in the paint, that to me it's going to be a problem. If you look at, I don't know if you watched I got a chance to see some of the OKC Cleveland game on Wednesday. But I think it was the best game that's been played in the regular season so far. When you watch both of those teams, on paper, you're like, all right, this is the top 2 3-point shooting teams. They shoot a high volume. But then you look a little deep and you're like, oh, they get into the paint.
Yeah.
They can get to the free throw line. Both of those teams have guys that if they don't shoot the ball well, because maybe they go up against a good defense like the ones that they're facing on Wednesday, they can do other things that will produce points. And so they shoot the three ball very well, but the best teams in the NBA, which the Warriors used to be at this, are not reliant on the three. And the fact that they have such a low amount of layups and free throws, especially with Kuminga being out now, as much as some people don't like him, it's they absolutely missed that aspect of offense, which hasn't even been there much.
They just lose a ton of athleticism. And you look at those two teams, they've got young guys who are physical, who are athletic, who are penetrators and can slow the game down, especially OKC. With Shea and J-Dub, those guys can attack the rim, and they can slow the game down when they need to and say, all right, we're going to get ourselves a breather here. We're going to get to the free throw line. We're going to bait some fouls, quite honestly, and the Warriors they just don't have anyone that can do that, really.
Yeah, can we get a foul merchant on the Warriors? A free throw merchant?
Genuinely. I think Schroeder would be the closest thing to do that, but I'm not even sure that's what he does. And just to go back to layups, I'm just thinking about how bad Draymond Green is at layups in his career. I think he might be the worst running layup player in the entire NBA. Like the amount of opportunities that he misses, I kind of identify with it because I myself am like pretty fast, but I just absolutely brick a layup in transition. So I identify with it, but I'm also not a professional basketball player. So there's an issue
that's
there.
true.
But like to go back to the point is that when you are reliant on threes and you're not making them and you don't really have an alternative, there's no offense. There's no balance. And it's those teams, the reason that they can open up the three is because they penetrate. It's like the NFL where you're like, well, we have to, establish the run and then we can run play action. Like you need to do one thing to help open up other, and it's all about spacing. And if you can't do one thing, teams can sort of sell out. And when you're not consistent at shooting the three at all, they're just going to, bet on that and say, all right, you can try and beat us, but you really don't have an offense.
Yeah, and even, too, it's like just because you shoot the three ball well doesn't also, unfortunately for the Warriors, mean that you're going to win those games. Like, I mean, when they lost to the Mavericks 143-133, like they made, a franchise record amount of threes in a loss, but they made like 27 of them, and they still lost the game. So just because you're getting a barrage of three-point makes doesn't mean that you don't need to still keep your foot on the gas pedal in regards to getting to the rim. And look, the Warriors last night without Steph, like that's a game that, again, against the Pacers, like they're not supposed to win. Right. I think they're 11-point dogs. They almost nearly covered. If Pat Spencer would, in the words of one of my friends, if Pat Spencer would have given up the ball in the final 20 seconds, we would have had a backdoor cover.
And Schroeder had like a couple bad turnovers at the end. They just looked so gassed because those guys were playing so hard. But yeah, they were close.
No,
they kept it close for a while.
They were somehow in the game. But that's where they need to be. Like, kind of extrapolating that one game, that's how they need to approach, I think, this stretch of the season, was to just stay in it. Stay in games, play with some sort of, I don't know if, honestly, Jake, sometimes when you play a long stretch of games at home and you don't play well in front of the home crowd, that can be pretty deflating. Like, I think the Warriors just getting away and going to some of these, tundra-laden places and just being out of Chase Center where they haven't been super successful lately, like that's to me where someone like Buddy Hield can find his stroke. Yeah. That's where maybe someone like Lindy Waters III can get it going. Just, again, they haven't looked like a confident basketball team, and that's probably why they've been, 7-16 in the last 23 or something like that?
Yeah, I wonder if they stopped it. Doesn't Buddy have like a giant basketball court in Indiana? Am I
No,
mistaken?
he does have a court in his house. Yes.
Yeah. I remember his. I feel like the Kings stopped there a few years ago to practice. But I'm with you. Like when you get on the road, I think for a lot of these teams, when you're not, it's like when you feel tight at home. Like the crowd's not with you. They're anxious. There's more pressure. And when you get out on the road, you're not thinking about that. You're just trying to play. But I go back to their offense in like the final minutes, and I feel like that's when it shows you what you really rely on. Obviously, without Steph, they don't really have a plan. But like there was no movement. They were all just standing around for those last few minutes. And I feel like that goes back to like when the motion offense doesn't work, and you're asking a lot of old guys to keep running that. It's like they need to innovate a little bit more with that stuff. And I honestly felt like their best offense besides transition was like big men, split action, like rolling to the rim, which is like a funny way to run it. But maybe you just throw a bunch of big guys out there and you just run screens for them and have Trace Jackson Davis, run split action off of that.
Yeah, and I had a sneaking suspicion this was the case, but yeah, Buddy Hield in 18 road games this year is shooting 42.5% from three, and in 20 home games is shooting 34%. It's always weird. Like I heard, I forget who said this. I was listening to, I don't know, it might have been Inside the NBA, but one of their guests was talking about how like it's easier for role players to shoot at home. You're comfortable, you're getting in your own bed, you got your rhythm. I don't feel like that's the case for the Warriors right now. And it's due to I don't know, maybe just like a larger feeling that I have that, especially with how, I guess, down to bare parts they are, because they're missing Kuminga. Podziemski's been out, though people haven't been a big fan of his. He does help the Warriors. Gary Payton II, though people are not massive fans of it, he does help the Warriors.
He's also in their best lineup of the season is Curry, Draymond, Hield, Payton, and Kuminga.
Exactly. So, those are guys that are solid pieces. And then obviously Wiggins being out hurts too. But it's like usually when Curry has it going, everyone's able to sort of feed off of that. I think because the Warriors have been struggling, and I didn't notice it a lot this year, but I think this year it's more, I don't know, jarring. When Curry has it going, everyone else, it's like there's pressure to make a shot because they know that this dude is still at the top of his game or close to it. And it's like, all we got to do is hit a couple. And for some reason, that like makes them more turtled up. Buddy Hield, when he's been at home the last month, it's like he's just praying for the ball to go in so he can help Curry. And everyone right now, it's like, we got to do it for Steph. We got to help Steph. And sometimes it doesn't work the way you think it is. Like, in football, it's like sometimes watching some of Patrick Mahomes' receivers last year. It's like, all right, all we got to do is just catch this easy pass, and then it ends up going right through your midst. Like, there's too much pressure, I think, that the role players are placing on themselves to try and help Curry in his time of need.
It does feel like fundamentally that's their focus, right? Is like, let's do this for Steph. It's like, how about you figure out just like how to play good basketball? And I know those aren't like mutually exclusive ideas, but it does feel like this whole operation is founded around, okay, how can we maximize this window? There's so much focus on like just Steph. It's like, no, what are we as a team, as a unit? What is the identity we are trying to build towards? And obviously Steph is your identity. He's your best player. But like, how do you have a cohesive operation that's just not single-mindedly focused so tightly and so stressed and so wound up on just like, oh, we've got this incredible guy, let's go get him a 5th ring. It's like, no, what are we building towards? What is the idea of what this franchise is supposed to be? And maybe you have to pull Steph out of the picture in some of these games and be like, all right, what is this team? Let's pretend we don't have him. And let's pretend he's not going to be back for a while or he's going to miss a couple weeks with the knee thing. What are we? And it's pretty bleak. It's pretty bleak. It's like they've tried to just fill these holes and get guys that can work. And again, they've got a lot of constraints they've faced, and and Wiggins hasn't been what he's supposed to be, and he's missed a lot of time, and Draymond's missed time, and these guys are all getting older, and they're not what they used to be. But they just don't have anything that it feels like they're building towards. Like if Steph, and that's why there's that whole Kuminga debate, and they're like, well, we got to keep Kuminga around even if he's not necessarily the guy, because we don't have any other building blocks.
No, they don't. And or at least the ones that they do have don't appear to be good enough to, A, just fully trust and lean into yet, or are good enough to get you a legitimate upgrade, or on the trade market. And I think, I don't know, it's like watching the game last night, and it wasn't necessarily pretty, but like that's the closest 10-man roster that I've seen to the 2020 season than ever. Like you go back pre-Kerr. I mean, that team last night, and again, there are injuries galore, but that's what 2020 was all about. It was about Curry being out for the season, Clay being done, Wiggins wasn't here yet. They didn't even have, I'm not even sure if they had D'Angelo Russell at that point, but like the point was that team was just, there was nothing there.
Right.
And all they were trying to do was win based on hustle and effort. It was Wiseman's first season. It's like we're just throwing guys out there and praying that they can play well.
It's a lineup that someone's going to screenshot, and then you're going to look back in 5 years and be like, what? 3 of those guys are out of the league. Who is that guy? It's one of those teams, and I'm not just trying to trash the players, but like that's the reality of who they had out there. It's like Pat Spencer and
he took
Quentin
12
Post.
shots last night. I realized he was 7 of 12, but it's like Pat Spencer was your third. Pardon me, was tied for your leading score.
Right. And you're like, I kind of like the whole game.
He
you're
can
like,
play.
You're like, I kind of like Pat Spencer. You got a good Pat Spencer, Simone Fontecchio battle going on.
Oh, yeah. You love Fontecchio, don't you?
I mean, listen, I won't pretend I was a huge Fontecchio head before last night, but it's something where it's like if someone were to have just taken like a 3-day sleep and came out of it, and we're talking Simone Fontecchio and Pat Spencer, they would go back to sleep for another 3 days. But it was entertaining. It was entertaining. And there's Guy Santos. Guy's like, he's not a guy, but he's...
See the Warriors Fontecchio?
He's...
Every team that watches the Warriors, or at least lately, that's been like, who is this guy? He ain't too bad.
And he's doing the thing that Alvarado does, where in transition, like his best asset is like a steal from behind in transition, because like no big guy is going for that. I think he thinks he's 6'2". I honestly think that's what it is, because he's kind of playing like that. You know, he's like throwing the ball between his legs. He's doing some like behind the back stuff, some flair.
Yeah.
You know?
No, he's I think someone like Guy is a necessity for this roster from the standpoint of, like, he's someone that knows he's only going to get a few games of run. Like, actually, he might play in, I don't know, 20 games, but like he's going to get 4 or 5 games if the season's going right in a season where he plays 20 or more minutes. Maybe. Like last year, he had a game in Brooklyn that actually was like the beginning of the end, I think, between the Warriors and Clay, where he closed for Clay in Brooklyn, helped them win that game. But when Guy, or someone like Guy Santos, can come in, the fact that they play with freedom and the other players are playing a little bit apprehensive or look like they've been the last few weeks, like that to me that's helpful for the group, because you see essentially the Warriors, who've been running this 13-man rotation at the beginning of the year, like Guy would be the 14th guy. So a guy who's outside of a 13-man rotation can just come in and be like, you know what? I don't give a bleep. I'm going to throw the ball through my legs. I'm going to play like I play in international competition because I know how to win. I know I'm a good player, and I just need to come in and play my game. And it's like, you know what? Lindy Waters, yeah, just play your game. Like Pat Spencer, you know what? Go for it, okay? I don't care what you want to do. The fact that you're dribbling across the lane when you shouldn't have the ball and are putting it in harm's way, you know what? That's fine. Just go for it. Like someone like Guy Santos, I think is emblematic of how I want to see the Warriors approach some of these games when they don't have the majority of their character.
It's also, yeah, it's just like when you have a guy who's young and has not played a lot and really is playing for his career every single time he's on the floor, and he actually does come out and play well. It just does something for a team that basically has no energy. All season long, it's just like, it feels like every game they're like, well, he might play, he might not, he's hurt, we're tired, we're just trying to get through. And it's like, I keep looking and I keep thinking the All-Star break is going to be next weekend, the way they talk about it. And it's like, boys, you got some weeks to go before we get there. Like, there's some time before you get real rest. And so when you do have a guy like Guy Santos who comes out and is at least playing with energy, is at least playing like, hey, basketball's fun. Like, this is an entertainment product. Let's enjoy ourselves. I think that matters a little bit. But then you get to the point where it's like 3 or 4 games and you're like, oh, is this our team now? Are we Guy Santos and Pat Spencer, and that's what the 2024 or 2025 Warriors are? Like, you get a little too much of that, and then you've crossed the pale, and that's who you are.
Yeah, I mean, last night they looked a lot closer to the pandemic dubs than the 2022 champions that we saw a couple of seasons after that. But
maybe that's what they should be. Who knows?
We can dig into that. I don't want to take it there quite yet, but I know where you're going, and I think it'll open up an interesting conversation. If people want to get on it, 888-957-9570 is the number. Again, 888-957-9570. Warriors this week with Evan Giddings, Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone alongside Steven Risotto. We'll be back after this on 95.7 The Game.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
Look at Pasta coming in with the cut. Tim Roy on the call. Steve Kerr with the, well, I mean, he's got to talk about Pat Spencer. He's got to talk about somebody in this game. They lost last night to the Pacers, but overall the Warriors are a 500 basketball team. They play on Monday against the Raptors right here on 95.7 The Game. Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone. Evan Giddings with you as always. You know, before we dig quickly into the Dubs, do you subscribe to the fact that this is the best weekend in sports?
I don't think so.
I've heard that thrown out. I think it's because of the NFL wildcard weekend. But I was just reminded, I am a fan, the Australian Open starts today. And I'm a big tennis guy.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Along with, well, it's the first big one. There's four of them, four majors, but the first big one, and the one that my favorite player typically tends to dominate. But, you know, it's just like, I think this is when people begin to start focusing on college hoops as well. College football now has been pushed back a little bit because of the college football playoff. I guess if you include, and maybe that's what people were talking about, like the college football playoff beginning Thursday with Notre Dame winning last night with Ohio State, and then NFL wildcard weekend. I guess it's got a case.
It's definitely got a case. I still feel like any like March Madness weekend where it's just like a Thursday through the weekend. And I remember being in school and you're just like watching on your phone. There's like a mystique to that, you know, is kind of unparalleled. But this is pretty good.
I mean, I'm trying to think because, yeah, the first week of March Madness is typically my favorite of the year. I only gamble, well, mainly gamble in the month of March because I kind of have like an addictive personality and I just go down these terrible wormholes, even when I win. Which doesn't happen as much as I'd like. But, so I was like, all right, I'll only bet in March. I'll only bet for the tournament. But I got to break my rule, and we were talking about this because my favorite team, the Chargers, play today against the Houston Texans, and I'm itchy, all right? I'm itching, and I need some sort of action on what's supposed to be a fantastic weekend of football. Did not bet on the Dubs last night, unfortunately. Well, I guess against the Dubs. But
well, there's also I guess it's a hockey thing, so it's tough. But when the Stanley Cup playoffs get going, that's usually pretty good.
Are you a puckhead?
No, only in the playoffs. Okay. I try and I've been trying to get down to San Jose for Celebrini, but
dude, that is the guy to watch in the Bay Area. I know, like there are some up-and-coming promising athletes. Someone, I forget if it was the morning show. With, of course, Bonte Hill and Joe Shasky, they were doing like a best under 25 in the Bay Area sort of list a while back, and I get it. Hockey's a little bit on the edge, and we don't talk about it much. But I don't know if there's even a clear like running mate with Macklin Celebrini right now.
Yeah, I guess what is Purdy 25? Purdy's in.
I think he's 20, right at 25. Yeah, so technically, like he's still in there. To me, it's Celebrini, Purdy, Kuminga.
Yeah, Kuminga has to be in there just for the sake of like, and it's so rough not having Kuminga because it's like it felt like he was finally, I don't know if he was fully turning the corner, but he was at least being more consistent. You know, he was at least getting it on the stat sheet, and you're like, all right, we can ride him a little bit more, and now it's this brutal ankle injury, and you're just like, ugh.
Yeah, and it's really, well, last year he had the I think the tendonitis in one of his knees that kept him out for an extended period. But nothing like this where it's just kind of a fluke injury has gone down. Like Kuminga's actually been a pretty model citizen in regards to playing time. And that's something that I guess, and look, players are young, you don't think they're going to get hurt, but like I've never thought about him as injury prone whatsoever. It sucks the timing of it though, because there's these two schools of thought that either you can use Kuminga to go get an upgrade and help Curry and make this team better in the immediate, or you hold on to him, and I think you probably end up having to pay him in restricted free agency. And not that you lean into him, but like you just continue to try and develop, and that next contract takes him into his prime and you see what you got with him. So, it's not necessarily about picking one or the other, but this injury does put a little bit of a wrench into, I think, the camp that would try to move him.
Yeah, it does feel more. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Is it felt like, I don't know if a trade was likely or definitely going to happen, but I do think they would consider exploring that. And now with him being out, It's like he's less appealing of an asset, and you come to the point where the season's sort of going sideways and you might not achieve anything and you don't have a clear direction. So if that is the case, and it does end up where they miss the playoffs or they're in the play-in and they do the thing again where they don't get a home game and they just whiff in those play-in games and miss out completely, it feels like more and more like they're heading to, well, we're just going to re-sign Kuminga, whether it's, $30 million a year for however 4 years. Like, that feels like almost the most logical, safe option for them, even though there was so much debate about what to do with him. I'm with you. I feel like the ankle injury could make that decision for them, at least going into the trade deadline.
Yeah, and this is, I like this thought from the 262. Let's be real. That was an exciting game to watch yesterday for the Dubs, even though they lost, thinking about JK coming back. Yeah, I think that game does have you thinking about the younger Warriors, and Kuminga, pretty much by process of elimination, is the head of the snake. And that's, I personally don't think that Joe Lacob wants to trade Kuminga. I think that's his guy, and whether it's because of stubbornness or because he actually thinks that he has a lot of potential, probably somewhere in the middle of both, like, he's not going anywhere, I think. Even if he was healthy, even if he was playing really well, I just don't think that there's anything out on the market that's worth what he could become.
And I do think there is a real element of Lacob, and I'm not sure how much this gets talked about, but I do think there's an element of, like, he came in, Steph was already with the team, and Steph gets so much credit for this being his franchise and building it up, and Steph basically, created Chase Center and all that, and you definitely feel like Lacob bristles a little bit at that when they talk about, we have to do it for Steph, and you hear Lacob quoted, I think on the TK show, where he was like, yeah, like, we do it for Steph, but, like, we do it for everyone. Like, I want to win. Like, everybody wants to win. And it's not that, like, he's against Steph, but it is like, he's like, well, this is my franchise too. Like, I want to build this up. I want to be competitive. Look how much I spend. Look how competitive I am. And with Kuminga, it's like a player under his regime that they drafted and they are developing. And it's like, so if he becomes the next star, that is like Lacob being like, this is my imprint. This is something we've created, and Kirk Lacob being involved. Like, there is a little bit of an element of, like, well, we can do this without Steph. Like, we can build up this franchise. And I'm not saying that's entirely driving Lacob, but I really do think that's a real element of him being like, Steph is aging and older, and obviously Steph is incredible, and we want to build this thing around him, and we want to win a title with him. But I want to show people that I can do this. Because, like, billionaires, he's achieved everything, right? Except making the Warriors a competitive, successful franchise without Steph Curry. I do think there is a real element of, like, let me go prove to people I can do that. Not necessarily today, tomorrow, the next 3 years even, but down the line, let me prove I can do that. Let me show people that I can run this franchise when Steph leaves and that we are going to have a competitive product out there.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And I think it's fascinating, kind of the back and forth that people have with Lacob, because obviously he's a big reason. Like, you're not going to be able to write the history of the Warriors without him. And when you think of this dynasty, he might not be the first person, but he's in the top 5. Like, he's on the Mount Rushmore of the dynastic faces for Golden State in this era. And even without the light years term, it's like Steph. I think Jerry West deserves to be somewhere in that conversation. Just going off the top, Steve Kerr, Bob Myers, and then, the Clays, the Drays, but Joe is somewhere in that mix, and he's probably higher up than I've given him credit for.
Well, owners shape everything. Like, if you have an owner who's chaotic and disastrous, like, you can't do anything. Even if they're hands-off, like, having a hands-off owner who just puts money forward is everything in the world, so he has to be on that list.
But that's where I think he's different. It's like, he is very hands-on. And They still managed to be successful. So clearly he's doing something right. I want to dig deeper into that in a minute, but I want to get the conversation rolling with some of our callers. 888-957-9570 is the number. Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone alongside Evan Giddings. Pasta with us as always. Pasta, can we go to John in Oakland? Wants to talk about the Warriors and their rotations. What's up, John? Good morning.
Good morning, guys. So what I wanted to go talk about was the offense and how it's being set up. I mean, if you hear Kerr on his one of his post-game reviews with talking about Jonathan Kuminga in the past and how Steph, you got to get the ball to Steph. You got to get the ball to Steph. Steph's around. You got to go pass the ball to him. And it's like we're centering everything around Steph. I mean, rightfully so, but it actually short circuits the entire team. So much so that you got guys that are afraid to shoot. And especially when you're passing the ball around the motion offense, and that's your primary way of moving things around, it just makes for some chucking the ball, making for chucking the ball at the end of the shot clock. And that's how come, the percentages are low. And it really centers around how we're running the offense and really how the coaching is centering everything a certain way. So that's my perspective, guys.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, one of those figureheads we were talking about, Steve Kerr, is absolutely involved in this. I don't know. I've kind of gone back and forth with him, Jake, about like the amount of criticism that I'll put at his doorstep, because I definitely think that there's been some games this year in which he's been at fault for, maybe even the reason at times why they've lost. But as the season has gone on, and specifically this stretch of 7-16 over 23 games basketball has gone on, and seeing how frustrated he's become, and even using words like, well, it's personnel, or this is what we're bad at. It's like, I don't necessarily believe that there's just another head coach or even someone on staff that can help steer this thing back to where people ideally want it to be. Sure, could they be a couple games better? I'm not going to say that that's out of the realm of possibility, but like, if I'm looking at reasons that the Warriors are going to turn this thing around, Kerr's involved, but I don't really know how much he can do.
Right. I think there's two things. But number one is like they do not have the dudes. Like they just don't have the dudes to be a really competitive roster. And that's why, the way they started the season when they had DeAnthony Melton, we're like, anything is possible. This team is, are they going to do it? And then DeAnthony Melton goes out and we're like, oh, this is actually not a good team. This is actually a mediocre team that could maybe overachieve or probably be right in the middle, maybe be somewhere where they're competing for a play-in spot. And so that's the reality. And Kerr, yeah, he's definitely messes with rotations at times and waits too long to put some guys in, tries to buy a little bit of extra rest and it bites him. Maybe he doesn't call timeouts the way you want. Basketball is so situational and you try and like go with the flow of it. You can make a lot of mistakes and in hindsight, it's so easy. I think there's so many decisions that have to be made in the course of the game. I think it's one of the easiest sports to just say, he messed up that decision and that decision. It's like, well, there's 150 little decisions a game to be made. So of course you're going to mess some of them up or they might not go the right way. Or, hey, that player's not actually very good. Or that player is not really consistent right now. And you try and put them in the game and get something going and it doesn't work out. I do think the other sort of criticism that you might have of Kerr is like the foundation of the offense with like an aging point guard and Draymond Green still having it be a motion offense, right? That's something you talk about is like, do they have to evolve and take some of the burden off? And I think they have tried in certain ways, and Steph has tried to sort of pick his spots a little bit more. But at the same time, like, it's a lot on him too, especially with the knee issue and just trying to get around screens and just fight constantly. And they do have some pieces with like Schroeder and Kuminga who I don't think really fit in a motion offense. And I think it goes to something like a few weeks ago, we talked to Greg Cosell and talked about involving like the 49ers scheme. And it's like, it's really hard for coaches to say, all right, this thing we've been doing forever, let's change it fundamentally. And I think that applies to every sport. And so it's like the Warriors have run like a motion-oriented offense for, a decade, and they're just going to change it just because Steph is getting a little bit older and they have some different pieces. I think that's a hard thing for them to do. And I'm not saying they have to get rid of all these actions and all these things they do, but I think there is an element of evolution that probably needs to happen sooner than later. But it's also tough when all of these guys are injured and you have all these moving parts, and you can really only do that, I think, at the start of the season and in training camp. And unless you just have something that starts to click and guys have a chemistry where you can evolve to a different offense mid-season, and without Kuminga being out there, it's tough to say you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, like if Steve Kerr was a bartender and is trying to make a White Russian, but he doesn't have vodka and he doesn't have heavy cream. Well, he can't make a White Russian, but like
he's just drinking Kahlua out the bottle,
which actually ain't too bad. But the point is like, all right, so if I have a couple of things, like let's say I have the coffee liquor and I have the Kahlua, all right, well maybe I can take some melted butter and whole milk and like whip that together, and I can try and make some sort of substitute. And I don't have vodka, but I have gin. It's like, but at the end of the day, that's not a White Russian. Like
right, you're just a college kid trying to mix alcohols together and just to see what happens.
Exactly. And he's had so many ingredients removed that, again, it's like you can still make a good drink, but you can't make the drink that I'm ordering, which I've ordered for the last 10 years, which has been damn good, and I like it mixed that way, and you can't do it for me anymore. So, thank you, Steve. That's in about 3 hours. But the thing is, like, you know, again, it's to me, it's kind of an impossible task, and what they're asking him to do, I think that there's a question about, you know, is Steve Kerr the right coach for this kind of team? And I don't think we've gotten to that point yet. Like a younger team, more of a developmental-based team. Because if Curry's on it, I think Kerr's got to be with it. If Draymond's on it, Kerr's got to be at the helm. You know, just like similar to the conversations we were having over the last couple of weeks about, okay, well, like is Steph turning up the heat in regards to, you know, maybe a potential trade or looking down the line and seeing where he wants his future to be, trying to contend for a championship. Like, I don't think we're there yet, but I'm sure these are things that all of these guys have talked about or at least thought about. Like the thought of them not being able to compete, not for a championship, but for the playoffs. Like, that's something that I feel like I've heard more often over the last month after post games. Just, well, you know, the whole, we're not built to come back. Or, well, it's a personnel issue. Or, well, I don't know. Or my favorite, which is, I don't know if you notice like some of the 49ers ticks when they're at the podium, but Steph,
oh yeah,
he taps when he doesn't know what to say.
Yeah, that was Kyle Shanahan when they asked him about special teams, and he started he had a water bottle cap that he started shaking violently with anger, and John Lynch answered the question for him. It was pretty fun.
Was that Kawakami that asked that question?
Yes, and he was pissed.
Yeah, I thought he was pissed. Kyle was going to jump across that table and just like assault him.
Yeah, a guy who has objectively said he like doesn't care about special teams. Anyway, Warriors.
No, but but I think like we're getting to the point now where some of those quotes are now being thrown back at the Warriors the way that TK in that situation. I mean, he didn't mean to like throw it back.
Because you can like joke about certain things and be like, yeah, we don't take this part of our game that seriously because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then it'll come back and you're like, oh, well, didn't you said this part of the game
like,
doesn't
obviously
matter.
I didn't mean it like that, but
right. But then it does matter because you're not as good, you're not as talented, and maybe you have to evolve. And then those quotes come back to bite you, and you go, well, you know, okay, you're right, but shut up. Like that's sort of the vibe.
Well, no, it's funny you mentioned that because there was a Tim Keelan piece on Steph that came out last week for ESPN, and in the piece there was a quote from Kerr about how he kind of regrets, I think it was the 2021 season, where he talked about chasing wins. And that's been, I don't know if thrown back in his face is the appropriate way to put it, but it's like that's kind of been brought up. Like, well, are you chasing wins tonight? Like, against Detroit. So this back-to-back, and Rick Celebrini's is the one that clears players to play or not. But Curry's older. He's been dealing with knee tendonitis. Now has a sprained thumb, which apparently he's been dealing with for 4 games. Like, they're making choices about which games he's going to play in. Okay, so, like we talked about it, which game are you chasing? Like, which game do you think legitimately you have a better chance to win? Let's go use Steph and try and get that one. Now, ironically, it was like his worst shooting performance of the season against Detroit, but they clearly were trying to chase that win. So, you know, this idea that it's like, that was 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, where he talked about chasing wins, but now it's more prevalent than ever. And they really have to be careful, it feels like, picking and choosing where to use Curry, because I think they realize that if they try and play him 28 minutes a night and have him for most games, they're not going to be able to get those wins. Like, he still has to play 34 minutes a game for them to win. And now it's like, all right, instead of shrinking his minutes, we're actually going to just shrink the games that he's playing.
It's this impossible situation, and it goes back to, like, if you're trading for somebody, right? Like, you need these, like, this big, well, not even the big rotation because guys are hurt, but you need this many guys on the roster because your stars are older and they need to miss games to even stay healthy. But in order to have a roster like that where you have, 14 guys and, and 3 through or 4 through, whatever are not real huge difference makers. They're sort of rotational pieces. You get in a situation where you need all those guys, but like they're not leveling you up. So you're going to be like a mediocre team. But if you go and make a move and you ship a bunch of them off, you don't have the pieces to get through the season. So it's this like catch-22 of this roster. And the same thing with Steph, where it's like you're trying to bet, and it's like, are you better off shutting him down like a week before the All-Star break and trying to buy 2 weeks and saying, all right, we might lose this 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks of him resting might actually buy us, an extra 2 or 3 weeks of wins going forward in the season.
Yeah.
And it's this impossible situation of like, this is what happens when you have a 36-year-old point guard who's aging and has to run around a ton and has fluid in his knees. And it's just like, what are you supposed to do when that is your entire team?
And this is from the 415. Again, 888-957-9570 is the number. If you want to text in, join the conversation, call in. Warriors this week, Evan Giddings alongside Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone. From one of our favorites, No, who always seems to be in some like, I don't know, place of like a utopia. I mean, he always texts in and says where he's at. One time it was like eating breakfast at a place on Divisadero. Another time it's him gardening. He might be walking his dog. Sounds like some blissful location. I'm not sure where he's at today.
There's only one place to eat breakfast on Divisadero, and I will not mention it because more people don't need to be going there.
Is it on Eddie?
Don't worry about where it is.
Don't worry about where it is. It's not. If we're thinking about the same place, you're right, because it's not very big. All right. So in my opinion, this is from No. It's not dudes plural. It's dudes singular. They don't have the dude yet. It sounds like we're talking about a cult movie. Yet the dude is a rim paint protecting pick roll big man. They have everything else on the roster. They just need that one dude. So this is, and I guess I'll throw this to our listeners as well. 888-957-9570. If you do believe that the Warriors are one dude away, who is that dude? Or I guess a better question would be, what kind of dude is that? Because I think we saw, like, for example, last night, Quentin Post got on the floor, looked like a nice, stretch five. Nikola Vucevic is a name that we will talk about as being a potential option for the Warriors. He might be the best guy out there. I'm not saying he's this player, but last year, I remember there was a fawning for Dario Saric, who was a stretch big, couldn't defend the paint, was a traffic cone on defense, but he started games for the Golden State Warriors.
Had some really good stretches last year.
He did? Kind of. I guess I never bought it, but you're right. He did.
Yeah, and then he was unplayable.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point. Like, just because there is someone who can shoot the ball on a team that's devoid of shooting doesn't mean that they're always going to be the answer for this team. Like, I personally don't believe that the Warriors are one dude away.
You don't think Justinian Jessup is coming over?
Justinian Jessup. Yeah, I think Smiley Geach is available too. Yeah, actually, Jessup's still in the cupboard, right? He's
right. I think they
developing.
still have his draft rights somewhere in Australia or something.
Got it. Well, it actually is funny. Well, we have a minute here. Some of the old, like, I don't know, articles that were written about some of these like developmental prospects picking up. Like, what was the headline about Smiley? It was like the greatest Golden State secret you haven't heard of yet or something.
It's awesome. It's always like, this is the most brilliant under the radar move, and it's like, oh, he's actually just not an NBA player. But
I think they have more NBA players on this team than they did like on the 2020 roster. But again, and I hate to say it, but it's like I did feel like at times yesterday I was watching 2020 basketball where I'm like, oh my God, they're playing hard, they're in it. But at no point did I think that they were going to beat the Indiana Pacers.
No. And it felt like the Pacers were just sort of hanging around and, all right, you guys can be in it, and there's like a 10-point buffer that's constantly, and then they would get it down to like 5 points, and then in 2 seconds it would be a 14-point lead for the Pacers.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the reality.
Yeah, and this is an interesting name too. I feel like a lot of people are stuck on the bigs, so we could talk about that. There's also a juicy piece of sound involving a spicy conversation between Lacob and Dunleavy. They came out earlier this week from Stan Amick. I want to get into what it means and where the Warriors are trying to figure out what direction they're going, because I think one of the issues that I have with the Warriors right now is not necessarily the messaging, but the just the direction. Like where, again, they're 19-19. They're 500. They need to go one way or the other. And people don't want to believe that they could go the wrong way, which is unfortunately where it feels like they've been for the better part of a month and a half. But if you want to get into the conversation, Warriors this week will roll on 1 hour in, 2 hours to go, 9 to noon every Saturday on 95.7 The Game. That's Jake Hutchinson. My name is Evan Giddings, 888-957-9570. We're back after this.
she slams it hard and point. Like, it's just such a difficult task, but basketball is so fluid, man. It's really difficult. I think baseball is obviously easiest and the best one to listen to on the radio, and honestly, I think there are fewer things better in the summer than, watching a game and having it on the radio and taking a midday nap for like 3 innings to the sound of like a baseball commentator's voice. It's just, it'll put you right to sleep.
I think it's Hank Azaria because, I was talking about this with Pasta. Like, you can have, there's a show called Brockmire.
Oh, yeah. I used to watch that a little bit.
Yeah, so he has this rule, Hank Azaria does, which is how he created this character. I forget which, it might have been Red Barber, like this old-time broadcaster back when, like, the Dodgers were in Brooklyn and the Giants were in New York. But apparently, he grew up listening to Red Barber, who also, I think his first real partner was Vince Scully with the Dodgers way back when. But he had this rule that for play-by-play baseball, as long as you give the count and the pitch, you can say whatever you want. Literally, whatever you want. And so, in the bottom of the 4th, taking a sip of this black coffee here, and the pitch is on the way. It's a curveball outside 2-1.
You really can.
Like, you can literally say anything as long as you kind of have the old-timey voice and you give the pitch.
Yeah, it's tough because, Tim Roy has to do the thing of, like, describing what the play happened immediately, describing how much time is left as it's ticking down, when there's a weird confusion on the sidelines. Like, set out of bounds, all right, they're going to, like, describing the play but not over-describing the play, keeping people in the loop and giving a little bit of context while also, stating the reality of where the game is and also giving context to other things that he wants. It's a really, really big challenge, and he does an awesome job.
I've also noticed, too, because Tim, along with Bob Fitzgerald, who's both of them been doing Warriors for a long time, it is interesting with the state of the team and kind of just where the Warriors are as a franchise, like the tone of the broadcast and how they've changed because, and Tim Roy talked about, I forget, it was like during the middle of the championship runs, he came on and did an interview here and was like, honestly, yeah, this is great. They're not playing well right now, but gosh, I did about 20 years of Warriors basketball that it was lean times. It was not quite the potato famine, but it was pretty bad. And so you're kind of hearing, I think, him and Fitz lean a little bit back into those days where it's like, okay, last night, for example, you're not supposed to win that game. So if Lindy Waters makes a mistake, if Buddy Hield misses a shot or goes 3 for 12, which he did, like, you're not going to hear the frustration of a play-by-play announcer when the team is, like, rolling, and you kind of have to, like, obviously it's a lot more fun when the team's winning and the team's doing well and the broadcast is making all these jokes and talking about how great players are. But sometimes it's like, well, how come the broadcaster's not as angry as I am? It's like, well, because with all due respect, like, they've been there before. And,
right.
And this is their job to kind of keep things a little more tame. And the Warriors, like, I know people may not want to hear this, but do you know what the Warriors were around this time last season? When they won 46 games and made a play-in, and, they weren't great by any means. They missed the playoffs. But they were like 19-24. Like, they were, so I'm just saying, like, things can get worse. People might not want to hear that. But the Warriors are somehow, some way, actually in a better position a year later than they were last season when they had Klay Thompson, Chris Paul, and Curry was actually playing better than he was last year. So, again, it's like they're not playing well. They're not looking good, but it's been worse.
It has been much worse, and I honestly think it's healthy to reset expectations. Otherwise, you just become like a Yankees fan who's just really, really just miserable.
Like the most depressed people.
They're so miserable all year long because all their expectations every single year are to win a championship. And if that's your expectation, there's really no way to be happy because you either meet expectations or you fail. There's no exceeding an expectation. And I think resetting that a little bit is kind of healthy. And this comes from somebody who, I grew up in New Jersey just watching like Mets, Jets, Knicks, like awful teams, awful owners, just disastrous. And so you build up a callous and an expectation of disaster is going to be the norm. Mm-hmm. And so that's why like I'm uncomfortable with like the Knicks being a competitive team now.
They're really good.
They're really good, and I'm uncomfortable with it, and I don't really know what to do with myself because they have to compete for a title now. And if they don't, it's kind of uncomfortable, and they're kind of failing. So I think resetting expectations, I'm not saying that the Warriors should be doing this and saying, all right, we're just going to take the year off, whatever. But I do think resetting your own expectations as a fan, it can be healthy to say, all right, well, let's not expect a title from this team. Let's not, but it is tough to be like, all right, I guess they're just not going to make the playoffs. So what are we? It's tough to know this season where to even set an expectation. And that's where I think all the level of frustration is fair, because you're like, what are we? Do we want them to be bad? Do we want them to try and make the play-in? Do we want them to make a trade? We don't know, because they're sort of rudderless right now, and their rudder is Curry, but he can't do it all, and he can't, it's the sinking tide, whatever ship. I'm forgetting what the actual saying is, but he can't just uplift this team single-handedly with two knees that are filled with fluid, and not enough pieces around him.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it's like, all right, the Warriors are 19-19. They're in 10th place, or tied for 9th in the West, but they're 2 games out of 6th place. And unlike last year, I don't know how you feel about the West, but to me, it's like there's a clear-cut number 1 team. And if OKC, quite frankly, doesn't make the finals, I think that would be a disappointment with how good they've looked without arguably their second-best player in Chet Holmgren. But Houston, I think they're still a little young and dumb. Memphis is a very good team. Denver, I think, still has action, but they're pretty top-heavy. I mean, the fact that Russell Westbrook might be their third-best player on the team is something. And then a team like Minnesota, who I think everyone just assumed was going to be towards the top, and
right,
they've taken a step back in the trade, which has helped your Knicks, or one of your New York teams. That is something that's really hurt them. So, like, the Warriors are not in an awful spot. The issue is, I think people are wondering, like, all right, well, how are they going to turn this around? Because the cushion that they built for themselves is now kind of, like, they haven't fallen below 500 this year, but they are damn close.
Yep.
And they've been kind of teetering the entire time. But I would argue the fact that they've gone 7-16 in 23 games, like, that is a poor stretch of basketball, and they still are not yet below 500. Like, I don't think that they're in desperation mode as much as they were last year, but I do think that they got jaded by the 15-game start. And so that, to me, is where the frustration from Curry and Kerr is coming from. It's like, we literally played a month of elite basketball. We beat Boston in Boston. We have a win against OKC in OKC. They've lost 6 games this year. Like, we've beaten that team. And I know that there's circumstances around that, injuries and all the rest, but it's like they're now losing to the Brooklyn Nets, and they're losing to an
exhausted Miami Heat team.
A Miami Heat team, the Kings without De'Aaron Fox, the Lakers, who miss Anthony Davis most of that game. And so people are just kind of, I think, I don't know, and it feels like the team has it in, is feeling it too. It's like, how do we figure this thing out? And I don't necessarily believe that the answer is external. So if you were to look internally, Jake, where do you look?
I think you have to look at Schroeder, who's just massively, massively underperformed. I think if he has and he is, a streaky guy, and he pretty much overperformed before the Warriors acquired him, and in every single stretch. His 3-point shooting percentage, I think, was a career high before they got him. And, of course, they get him, and it's a different offense, and he's not quite sure how to fit in with this thing with Steph where they're running 2 guards. But I think if he can anchor that second unit and actually, even if it's just, 14, 15 points a game and be a little bit more efficient as a shooter, get more comfortable in this offense, that's big. Buddy, it's tough because, you're like, yeah, well, if Buddy just shoots better, great. Yeah, this whole thing gets better. But Buddy has always been a streaky shooter, and to try and count on Buddy Hield to say, all right, yeah, just Buddy, start being more consistent. That's never who he's been as a player. So I think that's part of it. I also think Pods, after that really rough start, he was starting to shoot the 3 a lot better, and then he got hurt. But it's really you just need some of these pieces back. And if they're going to go out there and try and be competitive, you cannot do it without Steph, without Draymond, without Kuminga, without Wiggins, without Pods. So if they are going to be without those guys, You got to get more out of Moody. You got to get more out of Schroeder. And you got to hope that like Hield can like find a little bit of a stretch to stabilize you, while some of those guys are out. But I don't know if there's a tactical answer. It's just like guys need to play better, which is, I mean, maybe that is tactics. Maybe that's getting Schroeder in spots that he likes more and running sets that are better for him. But I don't know. It's just these guys have to play better.
No, I'm with you, and I think Buddy Hield, I think he's been symbolic of like the roller coaster ride they've been on. But someone like Schroeder, and I don't know, I understood the trade. It's a low risk, high reward type move. I don't think he's really helped them as much as people assumed that he would, and it's not because he's just shooting like 30% and 20 from three. It's the fit is something, and they even like they admitted it the moment they got him. They're like, he doesn't fit, but what we're doing isn't working. So we're going to try and make him fit or fit to him, and they just haven't been able to do it.
Right, and if he's like putting up numbers, we can package him and move him. It's at least a player who's healthy as opposed to Melton who's out for the year, and you get something for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if the Warriors were to make a move, and I believe they can trade him after a certain date, but I would legitimately think about just moving Schroeder again because I don't think he's shown so far, and look, it's not a massive sample size, but 13 games is not insignificant. I think they're 4-9 in games that he's played so far this year. But I don't think he fits not just what Steve Kerr wants to do, but I think what Steph Curry wants to do. Like, he was brought in to take pressure off of Steph, move him off the ball, be a better pest inside, perimeter defender, point of attack defense, all the rest. And if they can't get anyone, you keep them, you write it out. But if there is a legitimate upgrade out there, I don't understand why you would prioritize Dennis Schroeder. And I like the guy. I've gained an appreciation for his career and his approach to basketball and just professionalism in general. But to me, that's one that's like, I realize that they have nobody else to throw out there. And I mean, imagine where they'd be right now without him. But when they're whole, like that 5-man lineup of him with Curry, Kuminga, Wiggins, and Draymond, I don't personally see it.
Yeah, it's not working. No. It's not working. And you look at any of the advanced stats, it's just like clearly one of their least effective lineups. It doesn't fit. And there's a reason that they haven't signed him or made moves on him in the past is because he's like not a guy that fits that system. He's like a ball dominant point guard who likes to go ISO and likes to slow things down and trying to move in transition like they usually do. He's like pretty sloppy and he's had a lot of turnovers and yesterday he had some in some really key moments. It's just tough because like now you have to rely on that guy who doesn't fit and say, all right, just fit. Somehow you don't, but like maybe something will just click suddenly. And it's a really unfortunate situation because they don't have any alternative and until they can try and move him or package him with something. And I'm not sure if they'll even have that option.
Yeah. All right. This is from the 510. Again, 888-957-9570 is the number. That's Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone. Evan Giddings with you on Warriors this week. We're taking your calls and texts at 888-957-9570. This is from a little while ago, but from the 510, a Steph-centric offense that feels like the coach's kid and stops looking like good basketball. And maybe that a Steph shot is the best theoretical option, but it takes away from good team play and is predictable for other defenses. Yeah, that's something that didn't apply last night, but I don't know how you felt, Jake, like watching the team, even before when Kuminga was healthy. It's like Curry will take a shot from 30 feet. And it's not just because he can make it, but it does feel it's like that's the best shot they're going to get on this possession. And with Curry, I think most shots are good shots, but on a night like Thursday when he doesn't have it going, not every shot is a great shot. And I feel like there's so much pressure on him that either he's putting on himself or the lack of help around is putting on him that it's like, you ever seen Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Yeah, of course.
You remember the Bel-Air Academy basketball episode where Will's on the team and literally everything goes to him? Like they throw the jump up, he catches the ball, shoots it, and makes it from half court. Like that's what it feels like watching the Warriors right now. Like they're running a Bel-Air Academy offense and Steph Curry is Will Smith. And if Carlton takes that one shot, like they're going to lose. So Like, I don't really know what you do to address that, because it's almost like sometimes having Curry not force things or try to get other guys going, which I do think he's legitimately trying to do. Yeah. He is trying to get other guys going.
You watch him take a back seat a little bit and just wait and try and get himself going, but then sometimes when he does that and he doesn't get going right away, or he doesn't have a feel, like, you can see it, and it manifests in some games like that, and that feels like it's becoming more common. So it's like he has to press the issue a little bit, or else he's out of a rhythm. And so it's just like this team isn't entirely catch-22s of, if you do this will happen, but like it also means like this won't work, and then you're screwed. But you're right, like it is just like feed Curry, and if that doesn't work, somebody else just hopefully makes shots, even though that's the entire plan.
Yeah, it's like a multiverse with no good options. The thing about it, too, is, so I don't think that the Warriors are obviously better without Curry. But what do you make of the fact that this season they are 5-2 when he hasn't played? And I think they are, 3 games below 500 now, because they'd be 500 total when he does play.
Yeah, I think that means when he's not out there, people just play the game. You're not playing with this idea of like, all right, got to get the ball to him. You're like, all right, how do we play basketball in the most effective way? Like, is it setting up, Trace Jackson Davis and on rolls to the rim? Like, do we just feed whoever's hot? And guys are playing more free. They're not, I think, playing with that sort of that fear of like, all right, I'm going to take a bad shot. I'm going to get benched because I didn't get it to Steph. And I think there is sort of an implicit understanding that, like, if you take a shot that might be an okay shot instead of getting Steph an okay shot, because obviously any okay shot for Steph is better than your mediocre shot. Mm-hmm. I think there is that. There's that level of like freedom, and there's also like when Steph's not in there, it means you're like relying on some other guys and they have to play harder. It's like we're going to have to give way more effort because Steph is not out there. And so if you just play hard, like I said, if you play over that 70-75% threshold that I think most NBA games are played at until the final few minutes, like, you're going to make it hard on the other team. You're going to be competitive. You're probably going to stay in the game because you're just playing with a higher energy level, and that usually manifests in steals and offensive rebounds and second chance points, and you can make the most out of that. So that is kind of what I make is there's higher effort, and there's like more freedom to just take the shots that feel in rhythm, that feel like, all right, well, this might not be the ball going to Steph in an okay look, but it's something in rhythm of the offense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Also, a couple things, pardon me, to clean up here, besides my voice, is if you've been NBA centelled, that's fine, but Jimmy Butler has not been traded to the Golden State Warriors. I just got a couple texts about that. So that has not happened. That's NBA centelled. Have you ever been centelled? Like, or what's it, like the Brian Wynn host, or... Like, honestly...
I've gotten got, like, a couple times. I've never, like, tweeted or done anything with it, but I've gotten got a few times.
I forget who it was. I think it might have been, like, a LeBron James rumor that sounded believable just because of how self-involved he can be. But it was, like, LeBron James has said that he's not doing his podcast... It was last year. Like, said he's not doing his podcast anymore with J.J. Redick because Redick... I don't know, disrespected his wine collection or something. And I just read it and I was like, that's believable.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually brought it to the air and it wasn't true. So
that's fine.
Yeah, that's on me, Steve. Thank you very much. I'm also glad that someone from the 831 brought this up because we were talking about this before the show. Along the lines of trades or things that can get the Warriors back on track. From the 831, what would it take to get LaMelo from the Hornets? Jake, I'll hand you the floor because I know you're a big fan of his game.
Listen, I don't like his vibe.
Tongue in cheek.
It's so Gen Z. Like the fire emoji, 100 tattoos. I'm not trying to just criticize what someone puts on their body, but like those, like an emoji tattoo is something that is so cringeworthy to me. I can't get over that, and I know that's such like a boomer take. But it's hard, and it's like he's been on a team, with one winning season, and their roster's terrible. But like I don't know. He's such a ball dominant player. Didn't you say he's like number one in usage or something like that? He's way up there. Like, I think
he's like 40%. That's a lot.
And like he's a creative player who creates points and obviously that's a bonus. I don't know. I don't know what that does for you, and I don't know. Like, what would that take? I guess you'd move off Draymond to match salaries, or you put Schroeder and Anderson and Kuminga. I guess I just don't know like how that really fixes you as a team, unless you're just like, all right, we're gonna send Curry to the Hornets, which
he is from Charlotte.
Right. He wants to go there to retire, to be on an even worse team with no hope. Yeah, I mean, listen, like LaMelo's like a really creative player, but like I'm not convinced he's a winning player or really elevates this team. But I mean, I guess if you want to like put Wiggins and Schroeder and a bunch of picks, and they're willing to do that, it's not something to shrug off. I'm just like not the biggest fan of him.
No, I feel like it's always something we have, and I have a thought on LaMelo, because a lot of times we go back in drafts and relitigate things, and I have a thought further down the line. But like, how do you look at, say in football, quarterback wins are often used for or against quarterbacks when we all obviously know there's a lot more pieces at play. How do you look at the NBA and someone like LaMelo, or just best players in general, that like, all right, those are wins on their ledger. Jason Tatum's got a ring. LaMelo Ball, his team stinks.
Well, Jason Tatum's the second best player on his own team.
There you go. So I think that Jason Tatum is the best player on the Boston Celtics, but that's something that, of course, is like up in the air depending on what day it is. LaMelo Ball, I really like, and I think he'd sell a lot of tickets. Like, if LaMelo Ball was on the Warriors, I think they would be better, because I think LaMelo Ball has the ability to play winning basketball. He's just never been asked to. Like,
right.
At literally any point in his life. From playing for his dad, to playing in Lithuania, to playing for the Charlotte Hornets, there has never been an ask or need to be like LaMelo.
It's just all-star game basketball all the time.
I think it's actually one of the reasons why Jordan Poole fell so precipitously when he went to Washington, is because, yeah, he got paid, he got a little fat caddy, but it's also like, we're clearly not trying to win.
Right.
I don't have to play well. I'm not trying to play well.
And he's like just chucking, and not a good enough player, and not a smart enough, I think, basketball player to like overcome the fact that they don't have a lot of pieces. Like, he's just chucking to chuck, and he's actually not that great of a chucker.
No, but I also think, and I'm not comparing Curry to Poole or LaMelo, but it's like, I think this season has told Warriors, or shown Warriors fans, that you cannot do it by yourself. You literally, it doesn't matter how great of a player you have. And I think Curry, his powers are diminished, but he's still obviously a damn good player. He scored 38 on Christmas against the Lakers, dragged them back into that game, and they lost. Like, I think Curry's career high, this was a couple years ago against Portland, but they lost that game. So you can't have just one dude do it all. I think if LaMelo was in Golden State, they would be a lot better.
Yep.
But that's not the case.
Yeah, and you could, salary-wise, you could just put Schroeder and Wiggins, and that works. But
I actually don't think the Hornets would trade him.
Yeah, well, that's my thing. Like, why would they? What's the point? Like, you're a bad team. You've got an interesting player who's like locked up for 5 years.
Yeah.
I don't really understand it.
That actually reminds me, and we got to hit a break here, but on the other side, I do want to get into, all right, if the Warriors were to legitimately make a move, and this ties into their draft history as well, but like, what players do other teams want outside of just filling salary? I think that's another wrinkle in the equation that Mike Dunleavy is trying to solve. And I do want to get to that sound of him and Lacob on the other side as well, because I think Dunleavy, much like the Warriors, are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But we'll get into that. We want to hear from you at 888-957-9570 is the number. Thank you to the 213. Going back to my AAU days that were non-existent. Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone alongside Evan. We're back after this 95.7 The Game. Bosa, but Guy Santos, he's like a little, this is going to be a stretch here, but he's like a gladiator. So what if he's like a Brazilian Ben-Hur? You know.
Wow.
That's
I was not expecting a Ben-Hur reference.
Not a Brazilian Blur, but a Brazilian Ben-Hur. I don't know. That one, we're going to workshop that.
Can we get a tank for Guy?
Tank for Guy.
Yeah, build around Guy.
Get
build
Guy
around
help.
Pat Spencer. Get Guy help.
Yeah, the Warriors are glee with Guy right now. Or at least they were a couple nights ago.
I like watching him play, man. I know it's like a flash in the pan thing, most likely. But just watching somebody who's truly trying the entire game and he's exhausted and his arms are like turning bright pink because he's just like sweating and he's like struggling through the game, but he's like getting something going. I mean, and he's playing like a stretch 5 sort of role. Like when he hits a few threes, opens up other stuff, and he also gets better angles at passes when guys are cutting. Like the amount of times the Warriors get passes that are stolen because it's, somebody under the size of 6'5" and then those passing lanes. Like he can actually like pass over the top of guys in ways that their guards can't. And it's like a weird underrated asset that he and any other sort of, I don't want to call him a point forward, but like large wing who can pass. It's something that like opens up lanes that they don't have. And listen, it's Guy Santos. We're talking about Guy Santos here on January 11th, but it's something. It's something for right now in this moment. I'm all about it.
I don't know if it was January, but again, I think it might have been February last year when he closed for Klay Thompson in a win in Brooklyn. And it's like, well, that's what it takes. And this is, I'll give you a 4 from the 510. Geezus.
Ooh.
That one.
Now we're cooking.
That one's pretty good. I like that. If you got any Brazilian nicknames to throw at us for Guy Santos, or just nicknames in general?
I know he does look like, in terms of Pokemon evolution, like the younger version of like Anderson Varejao. Like Varejao would be the older version, and he's like the middle evolution, and then you get to Varejao.
Yeah, he's not quite he's like not Squirtle, but he'd be like the War Turtle,
right.
And then
There's
this Charmander,
Charmeleon,
Charizard.
So he'd be Charmeleon.
He'd be Charmeleon. He'd be right in the middle of him and Anderson Varejao. It's funny. Like they got Guy Santos. Is it just me, or I know the Warriors haven't had a ton of high draft picks, and the ones that they've got, they've largely whiffed on. But it's like it does feel like all of those kind of feel-good stories, the Guy Santoses, who was taken with the 55th pick in 2022, like that's kind of what we've been resigned to a little bit. And that's maybe, again, just why last night I'm like, they're playing hard, they're staying in this game, they got a chance, I'm enjoying the energy they're playing with, but it just feels like 2020 again. And maybe this is what 2020 would have looked like with Curry on Thursday in Detroit, which they won. But it's like I'm going down this list of draft picks for the Warriors, and I'm just seeing, Quentin Post plays last night, gets his first real run, and congrats to him. The Warriors need him at this point because they got 10 guys available. But, I mean, it really does bring up the fact that they have not been able to do enough with the draft picks that they've gotten.
Right.
I would say since they really reacquired their first back in 2019.
Right. You got 2021 where you get Kuminga and Moody. Great job. But before that, it's really you go to James. And I think they haven't done a terrible job. I mean, you don't love like Jacob Evans and Damian Jones. But like you get Jordan Poole. Eric Paschall was like a fun 1-year thing in the second round. And Wiseman is really where it bit this team. That said, it's like when you look at that draft, it's pretty abysmal. And so, unless you were going to get LaMelo, like you didn't really have many other options. And Wiseman seemed like he was actually turning a little bit of a corner there before he got hurt. It's a really tough injury for him this year. But like, I think this is kind of just what happens when you don't have a lot of draft picks to work with. You look at the Patrick Baldwin one, they could have got like Nembhard, something like that. There are a few guys after him that were better. But really, it's like a lack of draft picks for the most part. Because you're a team that's winning. You're a team that's winning. You trade away picks to try and win now. And so you get into a situation where it's like you're trying to do this stopgap thing. You're trying to fill gaps as they pop up. And now there are just too many gaps to fill or you can't get the right pieces. And like the Thunder, they just built with picks and picks and picks and they've got more to come. And so, it's pretty easy when you got that many bites of the apple to build it up. And the Warriors haven't had that many. So when they miss, it's a really outsized miss.
Yeah, it has been pretty glaring. Overall, again, with some of the misses and someone like LaMelo Ball, who they could have taken with their highest pick. I mean, gosh, in the last quarter century when they took James Wiseman. 888-957-9570 is the number. Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone alongside Evan Giddings with you. Let's go down to San Jose, talk to one of our favorites. Welcome Austin to the program. Austin, what's going on? Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, fellows. Good morning. Enjoying the conversation and the optimism. Well, you guys are really selling us this morning on. You just mentioned James Wiseman was. I mean, listen, I think you guys are being kind. The draft picks over the last couple of years have been atrocious for the most part. I mean, Jordan Poole sticks out as a good one because he developed himself. And I don't think we give enough credit to the DG League coaches down there that actually fixed Poole because he was a mess when he went down. And then Weissman was a bust, and everybody tries to talk around it, but let's just put it on the table. The guy was a bust, man. And then they could have had LaMelo, which I'll get to in a minute, but then they also missed on Halliburton in that draft. Halliburton was available. And Bob Myers even said they liked him, and for some reason they chose not to draft him, even though he wanted to play for us, which if you want to get sick to your stomach thinking about that, how good Halliburton would look on his team. But they passed on him. Then the next draft was Kuminga, and they could have had Franz Wagner. And I remember the great Whitey Gleason was saying at the time, everybody laughed at him. He said they should have gone after Franz Wagner, and there again, everybody thought it was funny, but now no one's laughing. That was definitely the guy they should have gotten. So LaMelo Ball, yeah, if you can get LaMelo Ball, yeah, you should go get him, man. Try to correct the mistake that you made before, and this notion that he wouldn't make. Of course, he'd make the Warriors better. The guy is a savant. He knows knows how to play basketball. He's forgotten more about basketball than most of the guys that are on the team. He grew up learning how to play basketball. I know that everybody tried to disparage his father, a guy that only loved his sons and taught him how to play basketball, so on. But people want to act like that was a bad thing. But all the Ball kids know how to play basketball. That's the one thing. So the Warriors missed on that. And then if you think about it, even if they didn't like LaMelo Ball when they drafted him, guys, he would have had trade value. The biggest problem with the Warriors right now, I think, Evan, you were going there, was trade value.
Yeah.
The Warriors have made a big mistake, in my opinion, in the past in not really developing guys to the extent they could actually trade them for value. And I think that's one of the challenges they have now is who on the rosters actually has much trade value, including Kuminga. Because when you listen to the guys comment about Kuminga outside of the Bay Area, you heard the commentator the other night with a guy that used to shoot threes. He was saying that Kuminga was a guy that was still, when he learns how to see angles, he said he's still learning how to play basketball. I mean, when you hear that from guys that are at a high level, they're still saying the guy that you're saying is this most talented guy on the roster, he still needs to develop. That doesn't sound like a guy that has a lot of trade value. And then the last thing I'll say is talent. We talk about talent, his talent. Well, there's a lot of guys in the NBA that have talent, guys. So I think we have to get out of our own comfort zone as far as thinking that Kuminga is really great. He may be great inside the Warrior locker room, but how great is he outside of the Warrior locker room, guys? Okay, I'll keep listening. Thanks.
Thanks, Austin. Yeah, I mean, I look, if you could get LaMelo, obviously I would do that in a heartbeat. I just don't think that he's on the board. I honestly, I don't think a lot of, like, if the Warriors were to trade for a player, I think I would, the prototype, maybe it's not LaMelo Ball exactly, but it's a young, promising, budding, potentially superstar. That's what everybody wants. And I think the only one that's really available and it has a natural inherent risk would be Zion. But LaMelo Ball, yeah, I would love to get him. I just don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I don't understand why the Hornets would deal him away. And in the Warriors at that time with that draft, I get what their process was, and they were looking at like, all right, well, we have this team here, and if we get Wiseman, who can rim run for us, who can maybe protect the rim, that was not really what he ends up doing, but maybe stretch the floor a little bit. He was so raw that they thought they could just develop and they were way off. They were way off, and they whiffed there, no question about it. And the timeline didn't match up. I think he can become a productive NBA player, but like not what they needed, no question about it. They should have gone with LaMelo at that time, and Halliburton was an option. I think they weren't thinking far enough out, which is where they're at now, where they get sort of another ball dominant guard to pair with Steph because to take some of that load off. And I think at the time they're like, well, we don't want to have a 2-point guard backcourt with these guys. That doesn't really make sense. And now that's what they need, ironically. So maybe they just weren't projecting that out far enough in advance. And then Kuminga, Franz Wagner obviously would be a better option for them. Clearly his value around the league isn't high enough for the Warriors to do what they sort of want with him if they were to move off. And clearly we talked about Lacob still being in on him and him being more valuable at this point, especially with the injury, probably to the Warriors and anybody else outside the organization.
No, I mean, I think Austin's right that one of the biggest issues with the Warriors is the value of their players. And like, let's take Wagner for example. And he was right. Like, if you had LaMelo, he'd be tradable. Like, the Orlando Magic could legitimately put together a package if, say, Giannis Antetokounmpo was available. Like, they could legitimately get him because they have players that the Bucks would want. Even if Giannis was available, which he isn't, why would the Bucks take the Warriors package over Orlando, over Houston, who's got, I mean, whatever you think of Jalen Green, he's at least a little more proven. And obviously Şengün is young and, you know, a very nice piece. But he's right. It's like if you had LaMelo or Wagner, you'd be in a better position to either have a future or cash it in to get a bigger chip. This is where I'll push back. And I don't know, this could be allow me to put my galaxy brain in. But I actually think if the Warriors drafted LaMelo Ball instead of James Wiseman, they don't win the 22 championship. I don't think they win that title.
Oh, I'm actually with you on that.
So, because I remember reading this story, and I give me a minute here. So in 2004...
Let him go ISO, folks.
Yeah, I'm going to go Westbrook. Sorry, I'm going to go LaMelo Ball for a sec. In 2004, the Detroit Pistons had the biggest whiff of that draft. It was LeBron, it was Bosh, it was Wade, it was Melo. They didn't get any of them. They got Darko Milicic.
I'm still in on Darko. Just give him some time.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he's a boxer now.
He's still developing. But the guy that they took, I believe, in the second round, or with their second pick, was Tayshaun Prince. He ended up being the starting small forward for the team that won the championship that season as a rookie. If they took, LeBron was later, but Carmelo Anthony. If they took Carmelo Anthony, I don't know if they win that championship because that team was based on defense. It was built around Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton as their focal points. If Carmelo Anthony is inserted into that team, they're certainly more talented. They probably are even better 10 years from that point. But I don't think they win the championship that year because Tayshaun Prince fit that team, which they eventually decided they wanted to trade for Rasheed Wallace. I don't know if they'd go get Sheed if Carmelo's on that team. So my point is, just because you draft somebody that has more talent doesn't mean they're always going to help where you are. And James Wiseman, Austin's right, was a bust. Didn't work, wouldn't have. But what he allowed is someone like Jordan Poole to flourish. If LaMelo Ball's in the equation, I don't think we get the Jordan Poole that was instrumental in helping the Warriors work through a playoff series against the Nuggets and had some moments in the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. Whatever happened in his career after doesn't really matter to me because he helped them win a chip. If LaMelo Ball is on the team right now, they are 100% better. Certainly better. They could use him as a trade chip. He could help Steph, alleviate pressure, all the rest. But he would have hurt Poole, who was, again, instrumental in them winning the title. So they'd be better off right now, but I think Steph has 3 rings.
I'm completely with you. And I think people might misunderstand that point to try and as being a compliment of what they did. And it's not a compliment. It's just the nature of the way things play out sometimes is having the wrong piece sometimes benefits you because the guys in-house in your roster get elevated to roles that they're more ready for than the guy that you would have drafted that would have been in that role. And again, long-term, LaMelo would have been better, but I think you're right. Like, it's hard to imagine him fitting in with that team and being a better fit than Poole, who wouldn't have either been in that role and you would have had some uncomfortability there. And I am with you. It's not to say the Warriors made the right selection there, but they probably do need to have Wiseman over LaMelo.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. I mean, it's again, it wasn't immediately going to benefit them, but having Poole elevated into that role was clearly more beneficial than if he'd been fighting, with LaMelo a little bit.
Yeah, and the 757 brings up a good point. LaMelo was hurt during the season, but you're not assuming that when you draft someone, they're going to be out for an extended period of time. Yeah, like LaMelo Ball has spent a lot of time on the shelf. Jordan Poole was a model of consistency when he played. In fact, I only think he missed like 4 or 5 games when he was with the Warriors over a 3-year period, and the reason why was because he had COVID.
Right.
So he was always on the floor.
You also don't know how these guys are going to develop if they were with the Warriors. Getting limited minutes, playing in a system that doesn't necessarily work for them.
Steve Kerr would have put LaMelo at the end of the bench. No. You shrug your shoulders, but no, I think they would be, look, if they had drafted better, they would be in a better spot. My point is that one of the reasons they're in this position is because they won the 4th championship. And they leaned not wholly into that, but if they hadn't won the title, let's say they lost in the second round of the Western Conference Finals, or maybe even lost in the finals of the Celtics, I do think that the process of trying to transition to whatever's coming in the future, or reset or rebuild, words that people use. Devone actually uses that word a lot on this show, sitting in your chair. But that would be expedited. Like, that process would be further along, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you in it, and I think it's tough to stomach where they're at now, knowing what we've seen them do. But the reality is that when you achieve what they have done, where you win 4 championships, sometimes you're going to suck a little bit. Sometimes, you don't get to just continue to run it back every single year. Sometimes your team gets, not sometimes, your team does get older. And you have less draft picks because you've tried to package things and move up, and because you have less draft picks, you miss. And when you miss, it hurts more because you don't have those picks, and you're not a younger team, and so you're relying on free agents, and you're relying on missing pieces, and the trades they made where they tried to, they moved off Poole, which I still think, I don't know how much. Obviously, they probably wish they had Poole right now, but that was such an albatross that they wanted to get off of and have some financial flexibility with Chris Paul, and they got out of that, and that let them have some financial flexibility when that got harder and harder and harder to do. I understand where they're coming from on that, but sometimes, this is what happens. You just get worse. You get worse, you get older, you have less assets, and that's not to defend the front office or anything, but I think that's a natural byproduct of winning. And when Dynasty crumbles, it looks ugly.
Yeah, and you naturally look back and you look at what could have been. They're also trying to figure out if there's a quick fix now. And it sounds like Rich in Daly City wants to help us with that effort. 888-957-9570 is the number. Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone alongside Evan Giddings on Warriors this week. I was actually just down in Daly City last night, Rich. I was at a Yokohama Ramen right by the movie theater. It was delicious. Rich, what's going on, my man? Good morning.
Hey, what's up? Good morning. One of the issues that I tend to believe, I believe in our draft picks. I think, the team has done a piss poor job of developing them, letting them learn from their mistakes. If we can't trade anyone, I get excited watching the young guys play. So I don't understand why Kirk pulls a Moody or a JK after they've kind of popped in other games. And I think same thing with, Wiseman. He was starting to pop with 20-point games before he got injured. And I think, coaching staff have done a piss poor job of teaching the guys that they're drafting them out of with 1 year of experience from college, and that was a COVID year for Wiseman. But they didn't do a good job of teaching them. And so, but now, if they're not going to trade for anyone, or they're saying they can't, why don't they just play the young guys? At least it's exciting, like the Key Santos is. Play them all. TJD, we don't see them. They're erratic minutes, and I just wish they would play them a little more. And also, all the salary cap stuff, they didn't have to re-sign GP2 or Looney again. They could have walked away and just cleared up salary. So I don't buy the whole argument that we're strapped. But I do get excited. I wish they would just play the young guys, sprinkle in Curry, and see what we got if we can't trade for anyone. I don't know what you guys think.
What? Thank you, Rich. I mean, yeah, if they don't make a trade, they're just going to have to figure this thing out. And I think they're kind of in just this, this holding pattern, above whatever strip they're trying to land on. And some nights they'll show up and grab a win. That's why, again, I think the theme of the month of January, at least until we get to the deadline, is endure and hope that something turns up to be the right move because, and actually, here's what kind of perked my ears earlier this week. This is from Sam Amick of The Athletic about potential spiciness between Lacob and Dunleavy. I think it's about the deadline.
The other night when I'm in San Francisco and they get walloped by Miami, after the game, there's a place called the Bridge Club near the arena floor at Chase Center. And the owner, Joe Lacob, and GM Mike Dunleavy often meet there. Back when Bob Myers ran the team, that's where they would meet as well. And it sounds like it got a little spicy down there just as far as the post-loss unpacking of what had happened on the floor. And you felt, some people who walked by and even engaged with Joe and Mike could really feel the frustration from the group. And that makes a lot of sense. They just got beat really badly. So then what happens is, whether it's Jimmy Butler or anybody else, there's going to be a constant recalculation happening for teams like the Warriors and just what do we need to do? Because it's one thing to not feel like you're a contender. It's another to go out and just get destroyed by a Heat team that didn't have Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, so I think Lacob is in the same place that a lot of us are as fans, because I think he also is one. It's like this team doesn't look good. They just got killed by a Heat team that was on the second night of a back-to-back and didn't have maybe their best player in Butler. And you got waxed on your home floor, and he's probably going up to the GM being like, not do something and not do something stupid, but what are we doing? What's your 1 month plan, Mike? Seriously, because if we don't have a 1 month plan, we might be below 500.
Right. I mean that goes back to the feeling of what are we? What direction are we heading? And you just so you've got Steph and Draymond, right? But these guys are old and they're hurt, and that's only going to be more and more common. And then your second highest paid player is Andrew Wiggins, who, not even talk about personal stuff, he's played better this year, but he's not a guy that's a true number two, right? He's fairly consistent this year, but he's not a difference maker. And that contract, even when he signed it, was kind of viewed as a bargain, but it's been rough. And so then your supposed number two is Kuminga, who's hurt, and even when he's out there, it's just, you're not a team that has any sort of consistent offense where you can say, all right, at least we've got this. So you're built around defense, but I just don't know what you're supposed to do. You want to go get Vucevic to a Chicago Bulls team that probably doesn't really want to make a trade. They still want to compete. You don't have any assets other than your draft picks, and your draft picks are only going to get more and more valuable because you're going to get worse and Curry's going to get older and miss more games. It's getting to the point where if you really want to be serious about how you make a fundamental shift, it's trading Curry, but you're not going to do that. So what do? Do you try and ship off Draymond? Who wants him? I don't know if they're, as Slater said earlier this week, what is the answer on this team right away? There might be one player in the NBA that, sure, if you put him on this roster, could level this up. Oh yeah, if you have Paolo Banchero, yeah, sure, this team is actually really competitive. But you can't get those guys. You don't have the assets. Or if some team is willing to give you the sort of piece you want, you're going to have to give up your future, and it still might not move the needle enough. So again, they're in this impossible situation where they need to just get healthier and at least have a semblance of who they're going to be going into the trade deadline, where it's all right, these are the pieces that are not working that we can move off and at least get something. And maybe that's just dumping Schroeder, but you're not really getting better by doing that. So I don't know what you're supposed to do as the GM. He obviously made this bed and he has to sit in it, but I don't know that there's a clear move that's going to upgrade this team going into the deadline.
No, I'm not sure there's one right now, and we can play that Slater sound for you on the other side, but overall, I think that's what the conversation between Lacob and Dunleavy is about. It's not necessarily a trade or a quick fix, but it's just, what are we doing?
Right.
What seriously. And if you have an answer of what the Warriors are doing, I'd love to hear from you, because I think there's many theories out there, and all of them feel valid. But 888-957-9570 is the number. I see you, Kurt in Oakland. Please hang on through the other side, but we got to hit a break here. Jake Hutchinson's in for Dan DeVome, along with Evan Giddings here on Warriors this week. We got 1 hour left. If you want to get in on the conversation, please do again at 888-957-9570. We're back after this 95.7 The Game.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
All right, 2 hours in the books, 1 hour to go. Evan Giddings alongside Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone, talking about the Warriors who stand at 19-19. It's a perpetual place of 500 this season for Golden State. About a little less than a month until the trade deadline, tied for 9th place. 2 games out of 6th place, but also a game out of, I believe, 11th, completely in the play-in. Again, it's like they're not in a good spot. There's no doubt about that. They're stuck right in the middle. But I would remind people that last year, and this stat was staggering, they spent more time, more days in the calendar year of the season last year in 12th place than they did as a top 8 seed. So last year, and a lot of people, I don't know if they were more down on them than they are this year. It feels like people are, I don't know, more down in the dumps about this season than last season, but it's like they were in a bad place last year. And maybe there were some built-in excuses, right? You had Clay's off the court stuff. Wiggins was obviously dealing with what we now know to be the ailing condition of his father. Draymond was suspended for 25 games. And it was just like, what are we doing? This year, it does feel like it's for more basketball reasons that they're poor. Maybe that's why it's a little more gloom.
It also does feel like they, Dunleavy and the whole front office were like, well, we ran the numbers, and we're actually going to be great this year. We're actually projecting 4 more wins, and you go from the hot start that they had, and being like, all right, maybe they're for real. We've actually cracked the code, and these big rotations, maybe it's not going to last, but sure, it'll get us to the trade deadline, and we can pick up another piece. And then Melton gets hurt, and the entire thing crumbles. And so you go, all right, well, we're going to ask more out of Pods, who's just not at all doing what we need him to do this year. We're going to ask more of Kuminga, but we're not really going to trust Kuminga, but we're going to share in the media that we love him, we trust him, but maybe we'll trade him, and we're looking for a star, but maybe that star is Kuminga. Does anybody want to trade for Kuminga? Please, please, please. Give us an offer for Jonathan Kuminga. So you've got that, but it does feel like the whiplash from the way they started the year, that sort of optimism that maybe this, strength in numbers, reverb is sort of working, right? Maybe this is happening, and then the reality sets in that it's not working. Steph's aging. Draymond's aging. Everyone's hurt. Everyone's tired. Our offense is non-existent. That sort of whiplash. Also, the holidays just ended, right? So there's nothing harder than going back from having a little bit of time off, trying to relax a little bit. You get some presents, you get some gifts. Everyone's feeling good. Maybe not feeling good, but you're feeling a little relaxed. You're not working. And then you go back to work and you're like, all right, let's watch the Warriors. And you're like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, God. What on earth am I watching? I think that adds to it a little bit, especially knowing that, all right, so these guys come back from injury. Is that going to fix it? There's no evidence that it will, and that's hard to stomach.
That's a good point. Yeah, for a lot of people, the NBA season starts on Christmas, and if you're just airdropping into the Warriors season, or maybe you've been watching some games, but not all the games. I do think we get siloed in, you and I, because we watch every game, we cover the team, and it's like, you see the doom and gloom every single day. But you also see some of the positives and the growth that some players are making incrementally. Meanwhile, people are just like, who the hell is this team?
Right.
I don't recognize any of these guys. I don't recognize the way that Curry's playing on some nights, but he's still great. What are they doing? I don't know. It's a great question. Let's ask Kurt in Oakland what he thinks about the Warriors right now. Maybe what they could have done in the past. Kurt, thank you for hanging on. Good morning. What's going on?
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. As a Warrior fan, I'm not too upset about all this because I watched them through the dog years of being the laughingstock of the NBA, where the Pelicans and the Washington Wizards were, where their last legendary player that played for them was technically Rick Barry. Even though Chris Webber was there for a year, but Don Nelson, of course, got mad at him, and that was that. Of course, Chris Millen was a great player in his own right, but yeah, so this is okay, it's a hiccup. It happens. You move on. But these fans are so used to winning, but they're not used to dealing with the dog years. So they're just like, oh, okay, here we go. It happens. The NBA is a, up and down type league. You just got to get the things going, and you got to draft the right players. The dilemma with Kuminga is they could have drafted Wagner, and they might have even gotten his brother back to take care of size. They could have gotten Sengun. Sengun could have helped a lot as well. He was in the same draft class between, I believe, Kuminga and Moody. That takes care of the size part. They've tried to draft bigs in the past, from Wiseman to Jones to Smiley-Geach even, but they just don't fit what they need to do. So they're not going to rush Post, even though everyone's like, let's see him play. He's not ready, but they're not going to rush him because they don't want to fail for the 5th time in a row on a big. TJD shows a lot of promise, but his dad played in the league, so he kind of has an idea on what he needs to do. And it's the downfall of that. They can't draft bigs, so then they get wings that take a while to develop. Jordan Poole is a nice little thing, but what is he doing in Washington? They said to him, we'll give you the keys to the franchise if you just stick around. Poole didn't want that, so they shipped him out. What's he doing in Washington? It's a never-ending battle. Kerr likes to have veteran bigs. That's how it's always been. Larry Brown with the Detroit Pistons was the same way. The only reason why Tayshaun Prince cracked the lineup with there for the youngsters was because he showed that he could. Okay, youngsters are on the Warriors. Show Steve Kerr that you need more time. Show them what you're capable of, rather than making a bonehead mistake and the next thing you know you're down by 8 points because you forgot to run back on defense and you're complaining at a ref. It's just show the coaches you can play. And yes, can they play? Of course, that's why they're in the NBA. But show the coaches you're willing to put your ego aside and put the team first before your own personal goals. Your own personal goals will come, but you got to put your ego aside and try to help the team. GP2 plays more often because he puts the team first. Pods tries to put the team first, which he's pretty good at, but he can't shoot. But he's out there hustling and doing all the little things that tries to help them win, but people are mad about that. So you're mad about a miniature Brian Cardinal who was known as the custodian trying to pick things up. It's just a never-ending revolving door. They just need to draft better. They need to get some size, as always, but they need veteran size that understands what to do. Set screens, box out the big. Let TJD and Green roam on defense because they don't have to box out the big and worry about rebounding as much. Green was at his best when he had Bogut, Zaza, and West behind him. Give him that so he doesn't have to worry about guarding the other people. Now imagine what TJD can do with that, because he's a very good shot blocker.
I got you, Kurt.
But yeah, that's what I got.
No, I appreciate a lot of good stuff there. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for hanging on. Draft better. Okay, so from 2009 to 2012, the Warriors drafted 3 Hall of Famers. They also drafted 2 role players. So they got Curry. 2010 was the Ekpe Udoh draft, which didn't go well, obviously. But 2011, Klay Thompson. And then in 2012, they drafted Draymond Green in the second round, but they also drafted Harrison Barnes and Festus Ezeli. Like, you're not always going to do that. But the issue is that they haven't had, outside of, I would say, Kevon Looney and Jordan Poole, really like an impactful, I don't know, like winning player that's contributed. I think holding Washington against Poole is not fair in my mind. Like, as we've talked about, you can be a good player on a bad team. Poole's not a generational talent, but I don't know if even Steph Curry could save Washington. My point is that asking the Warriors to draft better is fair, but the problem I have with them right now is they don't feel like they're willing to really be bad and attempt to find a good pick, but they also aren't good enough to be good and trade some of that talent or the talent that they've developed to improve their roster. So it's like they're fighting this, and I think it is Lacob. Like, it's a business-like mentality of we're not going to be losers, we're not going to be bottom feeders, and if you don't have a ton of talent, like, there's only so much that you can do, and we're starting to see those misses from the past and the lack of talent. Like, Kurt's right. You can't have Draymond doing this and TJD doing that. But it's like, I hate to break it to you. Like, on a good team, Trace Jackson-Davis is not a starting center. Like, God love him.
Right.
Against Miami, he had 19 points and 7 rebounds. That's a good line. If Trace Jackson-Davis is your second leading scorer, you're not going to be very good. And I love TJD. He's a good kid and he can help you. But the fact that he is the starting center for the Warriors in and of itself, along with the fact that Dennis Schroeder is your starting 2 guard, and he's 6'1". Like, yes, the system can help, but only so much.
Yeah, it's a lack of size. It's a lack of any consistent shooting. It's a lack of athleticism. It's a lack of anyone who you can try and bet on going forward as a fundamental piece for this team. And if you're going to say, all right, so the goal is to at least, avoid the play-in, like, do you really think this team is capable of, maybe they get the Rockets, right? And they can beat the Rockets in a series, and they believe, right, that any series with Steph and Curry, they can win any series. And that's sort of, I think, their thesis. I don't know if that's like a good bet with this team. Like, are you really going to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder in a 7-game series? No, but I guess your barometer for success is get into the playoffs and see what happens. I guess the question is, like, is that the way you should be running? You should be running this team, is to just say, all right, let's just try and make the playoffs. Let's be as competitive as possible and see what happens. Even if the reality is you're not beating a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder. You're probably not beating a team like the Timberwolves even or the Nuggets in a series. Like, you just don't have the dudes. You don't have the size. You can't hold up in a 7-game series, let alone multiple, to try and get to the finals and beat a team like the Celtics or the Knicks. Like, I guess you can say, well, we got Steph. We're just going to keep trying to compete with what we have, and guys will get healthy. I don't know. At the deadline, I think we'll know more, and the reality is I don't know if they can make a move right now with this team. Maybe they try and trade for Jimmy Butler, but, like, I don't know if Miami wants to take on, if they're trading Jimmy, like, they've got a lot of salary flexibility with him. Like, they're not going to want to take back like a Wiggins. Like, do they really want Wiggins for another, 2 years? Do they want like a Kyle Anderson, someone who's got like 2 more years on his contract? Do they want that?
I mean, I think the Heat would benefit. Like, Wiggins would help the Heat. I mean, they're starting 3 right now is like Aaron Highsmith. Or something.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a deal they could do, right? They could trade Wiggins, they could trade Schroeder, and they could trade Kyle Anderson and set a bunch of picks and go get Jimmy Butler.
Haywood Highsmith, pardon me. I can't even remember the guy's name.
And they could do that. That's like an option for them right now, and maybe Miami would be interested in that. But outside of that, or just taking a roulette wheel spin with Zion, go down to the Bayou and the buffet and see what's down there. Like, I just have trouble seeing this team suddenly becoming a contender, even if they were to go get Jimmy Butler.
No, and I do think that that's one of the reasons why they haven't made a move, and it's been frustrating to watch, but it's because there isn't a player, or even, like, again, over this summer, they didn't try to just get one guy. They tried to get Paul George and Lauri Markkanen, and they couldn't do it for whatever reason you want to insert. But that also tells me that they know right now they're not one player away, because they told you in the summer they weren't trying to just get one player. So I think the Warriors are unwilling to cash in chips for one guy or maybe even multiple guys. And they're measuring themselves against the best. And that might not be the best course of action, because I don't think that there's something, even maybe this summer, outside of Giannis wanting out, or, gosh, I'm trying to think of any disgruntled superstar, like Embiid, maybe, Kawhi.
Yeah, just get some guys with bad knees and
yeah, but it's like all the players you're thinking about are troubled. Giannis is really the only clear-cut one that I think elevates you to a different stratosphere. But even then, again, it's like it's going to be difficult to do. So I think where people are getting to, it's like we're being sold this false bill of goods that we're waiting for the right trade. Well, let's just face the facts, Joe. Let's talk about it, Mike. Like, that trade will never be there. And so I hear fans that are frustrated with the fact that the Warriors are, again, in this holding pattern of, well, we want to do everything for Steph, and we're waiting for the perfect deal. But that perfect deal is, like, through the door to Narnia. Like, we're not, it's not there.
The answer is like hitting on a pick in next year's draft and trying to make some moves. Maybe you can pick up like a Vucevic and that'll elevate you, and then you can make another move after the season. But it does feel like it's leaning towards like next season. Maybe they end up tanking this season and they get a high draft pick and they can make the most out of that. But like the reality is, we're going to have to wait until the trade deadline to see where this team is at, because they're not healthy. And until they get healthy and delineate either one way or another, show us which direction they're heading at that time, it's hard as a front office to say, like, which way should we head? Should we double down on this team and say, all right, we're going to go get Jimmy Butler, we're going to go do whatever? How does that? Where does that get you to the 7th seed and a first round exit, and then you've traded away all of your draft picks for the next, this year and 3 years down the line? Like, is that building a team, or is that just like fan service?
I don't know. I mean, and that's why I was a proponent of the Butler deal. It's like, at least I've seen this guy take literally a 7th seed to the NBA Finals, and that kind of feels like it's what the Warriors are praying for. I don't know if they're religious or not. I know Steph is, but that's basically what they're on hands and knees asking for. All right, let's talk to Bobby in Oakland's been hanging on patiently. Bobby, you're on with Jake and Evan. What's going on? Good morning.
Hey, thanks for having me on. You guys having a good conversation. It sparked me to call in. And, I'm just looking at the Warriors right now. You look, obviously the draft picks, making those decisions, who you're going to get, missing out some key draft picks. And to me, Jordan Poole's situation has really put this team in a phase of being neutral, which is horrible. You don't want to be in a neutral in the middle, not good enough to shoot for a championship, just barely either making the play in and or missing the playoffs totally. So listen, we got to look at this thing realistically. It's just simply time to rebuild. Have a conversation with Curry and to let him know, hey, we're going to do a reset. We'd love to have you be around for it. We understand if you want to move on. Whatever you do not give up a first-round pick to make a trade, because there's not a trade out there that's going to help propel you into where you want to go. The CBA locks good creative trades down. At the same time, there's not one play out there that's going to make a big difference. So play the young guys, have a conversation with Curry, time to do a reset, because there's nothing you can do, unfortunately, that's going to propel you to where we once been in a quick fix. So just do the rebuild and go on from there. That's my thought on that.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, time to start the rebuilding process. It's funny. Like, the messaging has been, we're still trying to maximize the window. We're trying to do everything for Steph, which I also find funny because I don't think that was the messaging when they actually won the title, now 3 seasons ago. But the actions tell me something a lot different than their words.
Yep.
I actually do think that the Warriors are closer to rebuilding than they are to competing. They just can't have that be the public direction of the franchise because you have Curry on it.
Here's the thing. He's the most valuable asset in the NBA. Like, he fundamentally changes. You might have a down year. Your ratings with Curry are still going to be incredible. The amount of jerseys you sell, the amount of, like, from a business standpoint, you're going to trade away Steph to rebuild. Joe Lacob's not doing that. Like, that's just, even if that is the right move. And I'm saying from a team building standpoint, trading away Steph and trying to rebuild is like not a bad idea. I just full stop in terms of, if you want to set yourself up for the future and try and build a competitive roster, you move off huge salaries and you just get an abundance of picks for the next, half decade, you can set yourself up pretty well. But you also might whiff on those picks. And then you might have traded away Stephen Curry, who went somewhere else to a competitive team, and then you have to live with yourself. And that's not something that I think that they're even maybe it's something they consider in passing. I just don't see a way that they would really thoroughly consider that. And again, with Steph, even when he is getting older, even with all this, if you put like a wing who can put up 20 points, who does fit in this system, like, you can be competitive, you can be spicy, and maybe you add a draft pick over the summer that does add something, or you package something else, or you make a couple moves and you lose some of these other big salaries, or you move off Wiggins. I don't know. But there are moves to be made, I think, going into next summer, and there still might be moves to be made at the deadline, but I have trouble believing they would ever consider, from a business standpoint and from a, oh God, we traded Steph Curry standpoint. I just can't fathom them ever really considering that.
No, I think it'd be something that he would have to suggest. which I don't think is necessarily far-fetched because I think Steph is as competitive as anybody. He's a nice guy. He's probably the best superstar and face of a franchise and all the rest in the NBA, but he doesn't want to wallow and squalor until the end of his career, at least I believe. So to me, it's like that conversation won't happen until or if the Warriors miss the postseason again. But I guarantee you that's going to be every headline this summer if the Warriors do what they did last year, which is be a 10 seed and get bounced in the first round of the play-in.
Yeah. You're also never going to win a trade when you trade Steph Curry. Like, it's going to be, at least not in the moment. There's like no shot. Even if you were to get an abundance of draft picks and like really young up-and-coming players, you're still losing Steph Curry.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to stomach that. But, I am with you. Steph is an incredibly competitive dude. He's like mentioned the, Charlotte thing, that they're not going to be competitive enough. But like, I do think if they both come to the same page after the season and it goes sideways and he doesn't believe in their vision and they say, yeah, I mean, maybe we do want to rebuild. It's not impossible. But I just really have a hard time believing that they would do that.
Yeah, because just because you choose to rebuild doesn't mean it's going to work. Like,
it most often
it took James Wiseman with the second overall pick. Like, just because you have a top pick does not mean it's going to work. All right, let's sneak Matthew in San Francisco in before we got to hit a break here. Matthew, good morning. What's going on? You're on Warriors this week. How are you?
Good. First thing, a side note before I assess like the future in the Warriors in 2 years. First of all, another whiff with not keeping Ty Jerome. He'd be a perfect backup point guard for now. I saw the game against the OKC the other night. I'm like, why did this guy leave? I know Poole was playing at that time, but the year after that, and that's exactly what we need, is somebody who manages the second team. And the alarmist bell that I kind of want to ring is, where are we at 2 years from now, right? Like 2 years from now, we have all these journeymen, they're going to be gone. But who actually might be a piece for us in 2 years? TJD has the makings of a good backup center. Podziemski, we hope, could be a backup point guard. Moody, as my buddy said, the idea of Moody's better than the actual reality of Moody. He's really not going to be anything. As much as we can hate on sometimes JK for his bad decisions, our hopes rest with him developing more into a true two-player. So I'm going to support JK and not try to hate on him. He's got to be a better free throw shooter. But really, 2 years from now, if I'm Curry, I'm looking at it, maybe you got a backup point guard with Podziemski. Maybe you got a backup center in TJD. Maybe you got a 2-point number 2 scorer with JK. The rest, I mean, there's just nothing there. You got to get rid of Wiggins. He's out for personal reasons against the Pistons. I'm just tired of the shenanigans. You can have empathy for him and everything, but we got to move on from that guy. Maybe we can get a couple second-round picks, but just get that guy out of here soon. And, I feel like LeBron, for example, they've built talent around him in his late 30s. And if they don't do that for Steph loves the Bay, but at a certain point, I could easily see Steph saying, you know what, I'm not going to be like Kobe 2014, where there's just a bunch of garbage around me. And I guess he stayed, but it's not going to be a pretty finish. So anyway, that's my hope. My hope is that I don't know. I don't have a lot of hopes, but I'm thinking about the Warriors 2 years from now, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, it is, Matthew. I promise in 2 years, look, things may not be better, but it's not as if basketball is going to cease to exist. Chase Center will still stand. Curry hopefully will still be playing basketball. But, I just think we have to reset expectations. I don't know if the Warriors are going to reset or rebuild, but we as fans or media members or just viewers of the NBA, we need to reset our expectation of what Golden State Warriors basketball is. And I think that's kind of the hardest part because you're seeing it play out in real time. But on the other side, I want to talk to BJ in North Carolina. I also have a few thoughts off of that. We got one more segment. If you want to get your calls in or text in, 888-957-9570 is the number. Jake Hutchinson in for Dan Devone alongside Evan Giddings. We're back after this. in Houston. That's right. Bolt gang or don't bang. I'm talking about the Chargers. I know this is a Warriors show. Sorry. I just had to get that off my chest. All right, Jake. One more segment left. We're not going to be able to figure this thing. Thank you, Steiny. We're not going to be able to figure this thing out in 30 minutes. But again, we're moving in a direction I think is positive. It's optimistic from the standpoint we got to be open to things. We got to open our minds. This idea that
free love.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's the free love.
That's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think why I have enjoyed covering the Warriors the last 2 years. I was lucky enough to start during the championship season, but the last couple of years, it has made you reconsider how to do things. Like the state of the team is not great, but I'm not necessarily certain that one move here, one decision there would change the course of history with how it's gone. But the Warriors are moving to a place where they are, I think, slowly transitioning towards kind of a reset. And I hope that reset includes Curry, because I would love to see him, remain with the Warriors for his entire career. And our caller before the break mentioned like Kobe, and things didn't look good the last couple of years. Dirk Nowitzki was a one-team guy, and the last few seasons didn't result in great success for them, though it did produce a pick that they used to select Luka Doncic. My point is, like, what I think the Warriors just have to do is stop selling us on this idea of a fifth title. Number one, because I think it's probably not going to happen. Number two, because you didn't even sell us on the idea of a fourth title when they got that one. That's why, to me,
it just happened by accident.
That's the sweetest championship. It happened by hard work, and it happened by talent, and it happened by fit and glue and all the rest. But we didn't expect that.
They didn't expect that. The way they talk about that is that they're like, I cannot believe we won that. They cannot believe they won that championship. They're still like, how did you get? And a lot of it, like, they did get extremely lucky with like injuries, and there were a lot of teams that were, ravaged in those playoffs.
Yeah, so it's got COVID and all
right. They still they are still in awe of the fact that they won that and pulled that off, despite having no real business doing that. But I'm with you. I think there is the direction they should be going is, all right, which pieces are here for the long haul? Like just plan on keeping Curry and build everything around. All right, we're going to keep Kuminga. We got Moody locked up for the next few years. We'll keep Podziemski. We'll keep TJD. Everybody else, get younger, get more athletic. Not a full tank, but a mini tank. I don't know. You just try and get younger pieces, get size, get guys that can help take the load off Curry, and maybe that involves trading Draymond. I don't know. I mean, obviously he and Steph go together, and they probably want to stick together. And I still think Draymond's having a pretty good year, and he's looked pretty good on defense, and his value in setting up the offense is high, but I think that's declining. I don't know how much you can actually get for him in a trade, but you do the sort of mini rebuild where you're keeping Steph, you're keeping some of these young pieces, and you just have to stay, unfortunately, like patient and probably mediocre, and just hope that those pieces, knowing that they're all together, start to gel and start to get healthier, and it just works. It's not really a sexy sell. It's not a big trade, and I'm not taking the trade off the table, but I do think you have to evaluate all of these like sort of malleable assets. Like I like Kyle Anderson, and he's a good player, and I like GP2, and Wiggins when he's consistent is good, and like Buddy Hield when he gets hot is good, but like how much of these guys are worth keeping around?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, really, there's only one player in my mind that is certain to be here, say, in 2 seasons. Because it feels like, and this always happens, when your team is stuck, you look backwards and you look forwards. It's hard to look at the present because the present is not very positive. Or you just don't know what direction it's moving in. The only player that I think is off the table to not be on the team, or to be on the team in 2 years, is Curry. Like, that's the only guy that I would like to see on the team in 2 seasons. That also includes maybe even the head coach. I think Kerr's future is up in the air. I think his deal is up after next season.
Yeah, they tried to marry it, and they extended Curry one beyond his. So you're right.
Curry matches up with Draymond, but if he's not on the team in 2 years, that would not crush my soul. if he's not on the team next season. That wouldn't crush my soul because, again, I think we need to be open-minded about the Warriors and the state of the franchise. The biggest issue I've had with this season, again, is the messaging. The messaging about how good the young players are, the messaging about how competitive this roster can be among the greats, or the best of the league. Like, putting the Warriors, even when they were 12-3, in the conversations of the Bostons, the OKCs, and the Clevelands, to me, like the three elite teams that have legitimate aspirations to win a title. Everyone else, like the Knicks are kind of on the fringe, on the outside. I think Denver, maybe Memphis, have reason to believe that they got action in the West. But like those three teams, Cleveland, OKC, Boston, the Warriors were never going to be that. And I know that they beat Boston in Boston. I know that they beat OKC and OKC. I never looked at them as of that ilk. So I think they need to be more realistic. And that's kind of, I guess, my biggest problem with them. It's like, dude, we can all see it.
No question.
Like, don't take us for fools.
And I think it's obvious when, and I talked about this earlier, if you put the Warriors, when you just look at like, all right, we're going up against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Minnesota Timberwolves, like guys with some really good young players or just solid veterans, and you look at those lineups, like you're not feeling good. You're not feeling like, ooh, we got Brandon Podziemski, right? You're not feeling like, oh, it's okay, we got Moody, right? And that ideally is sort of what they're trying to sell you on. So you just go into those games looking at the lineups and knowing we don't have the dudes to really compete unless we get the best out of our guys and they have an off night. And, obviously the Timberwolves haven't been where they're supposed to be, but in terms of personnel, in terms of what some of those guys have just on their roster, you just don't match up in the same way. And that's how you know that whole thing about, oh, our young guys are so good. You don't feel it. You don't feel it when you see these teams having to go up against some of the even semi-talented rosters in the same conference.
No doubt. 888-957-9570 is the number. Got about 20 minutes left before the end of Warriors this week. As always, 9 to 12 every single Saturday. Jake Hutchinson filling in for Dan Devone. Evan Giddings with you, along with our man Steven Pasta Risotto. BJ is in North Carolina. Pasta, can we go to North Carolina? My favorite state in the Union. What's up, BJ? How we doing? BJ, going once. Going twice. Gone! All right, sorry, BJ. Please call back if you got something for us. But had thoughts on a rebuild. I don't think that if Curry's on your roster, I don't think you can rebuild. But I do think that it's acceptable to think about transitioning. And maybe that, like, the other problem that I guess now looking back on the summer that I had is, and you want to sell people on, the positive side, the optimistic outlook, but like you mentioned the spreadsheets earlier, or the metrics, like the complicated algorithms that the Warriors are running inside Chase Center. And they got a bunch of venture capitalists putting their heads together.
It's just an abacus.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a bunch of mad scientists trying to figure out how Buddy Hield's going to shoot 45%.
It's one 17-year-old who's their quant, and they're just relying on him.
But did these quants factor in the possibility that, yes, you could be a 55-win team, you also might be a 35-win team? Like, I realize that you never want to look at the other side of the coin, but you had to plan for a worst-case scenario. And this feels, if worst-case scenario is 500, I guess that's not the worst place you could possibly be, but
it kind of is.
There's someone, well, that's true, but someone in that brain trust had to pipe up during one of the meetings and be like, hey, this could not go well.
Hey guys, what if we suck?
Like,
what if we actually,
it's possible we could be a dumpster fire.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality they're facing now. And right, and I think so when you go with those models and that stuff that they're talking about, they're saying, all right, what is the most likely case scenario? And they're saying, all right, well, with all these guys we have and all these pieces, we got a lot of flexible rotations, and we'll figure out which works best with which. And I think they probably bet on being healthier this season and having Draymond back, and they probably counted too much on Draymond. Like, they're like, all right, well, he's not going to get suspended for, 25 games. Like, well, he's, 34? and has had disc problems in the past, and Curry's 36. Like, I'm sure they factored in some age-related stuff. Probably didn't factor in this much. And they probably didn't factor in a lot of the injuries to their younger players. I'm certain they didn't factor that in with Kuminga. And they probably hoped De'Anthony Melton wouldn't have, suffered a season-ending knee injury. But that's also why he was available for the price he was available. So they kind of went in with a roster that was like, all right, we got some pieces, we got some guys, maybe. And in the best-case scenario, it's actually a really good roster if they have Melton and everyone's healthy, and like it was clicking at the start of the season. But you're right, they probably didn't give enough credence or credibility to the fact that if it even goes a little bit wrong, it can go really wrong. And again, they're at 500, but to me, again, that's the middle of nowhere. You're wading through the desert of mediocrity. That's a pretty awful place to be.
Yeah, and look, De'Anthony Melton's injury obviously hurt the Warriors, but I guess I'm of the school of thought that if that was the Jenga block that forced the tower to fall, your Jenga tower was not built that well.
Yeah, they were just doing the thing where you try and it's really precarious already, and you just keep trying to get stack on top because you're like, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm going to go for it. I'm feeling myself.
Exactly. Yeah, they're playing with fire from the beginning of the season. We just didn't recognize it. All right, BJ's back from North Carolina. BJ, where are you calling from in North Carolina, by the way? I love that state. What's going on? Oh, no. Is he calling from a bunker? My guess would be the Outer Banks. Hello? Hey, BJ, I got you. Stay right there.
Okay.
What do you got?
Okay, this is BJ.
BJ, how we doing? You're on Warriors This Week.
Okay, I'm doing fine, man. I've talked twice, maybe y'all didn't understand me or whatever.
Oh, sorry about that.
Like I was saying, I enjoyed y'all show. I'm going to try to make it brief possible because so many can talk. And I was talking about Steph. He's one of my favorite players always, him and Kobe Bryant. But getting back to Golden State, they're my team. And what I was saying is about Kuminga. He's a young player. He got a lot to improve. But the boy is very athletic. And I know he needs improvement on his free throws, as one of you were saying a while ago. But what I was saying, but you got a bunch of more other guys need to improve on their free throws too. Where some people down to Kuminga on their free throws, but then you got even Draymond Green. As long as he's been playing, he's not good on free throws. Pods is not good on free throws. GP too is not good on free throws. So I'm just saying is that some people's kind of hard on Kuminga because of his free throws. But the board's regular improvement card, I can see where Andrew Wiggins have been working with him, and he is improving on his free throws. So that's what the only thing I had to say on that. That Kuminga, I do believe, will be one of their stars one day if he keep working with Steph and Draymond Green. And that's what I want to say about that.
Thanks, BJ. Yeah, I think Kuminga is absolutely the brightest spot. And it just got me thinking. It's more like GP 1 for 2 at the free throw line. It feels like that's kind of where the majority of... it wasn't that good. But it's...
No, it wasn't.
But it's like... Yeah, I mean, Kuminga is really all you have to build around at this point. You know, some people don't see it. I really like him, and it's mainly because of just what the Warriors don't have. They don't have any talent, and he's really the one talented player they do have.
Right. And the problem is what is he gonna? He's like a polarizing player because you keep wanting him to be a clear version of a player, and he's not that. He's not probably ever going to be a great shooter, and he works really hard at it, and so maybe he'll keep improving. Obviously, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's like the best example of a guy that kept working, but he probably had a better foundation to work with. And Kuminga did come into the NBA pretty raw, so maybe it's worth having more of a grace period, not a grace period, but thinking it's going to take him a little longer to really turn a corner. And I think people do forget the timelines of it can take guys longer than what you expect it to hit a level. There is improvement to be made year after year after year. I think in general our brains have been so rewired to be in the moment that it's hard to have that perspective and say, actually, no, this guy is improving every single season. He's really athletic, and maybe he is going to become a decent shooter. I don't necessarily believe that. I don't necessarily know that he's got, the basketball IQ to become a player that's going to be, say, a number 2, a consistent 20 to 25 point per game scorer, and I don't know that he rebounds all that well, and he's not like an elite distributor, so he's really just more of a slasher and a point and a forward who's going to get you some points in transition and keep energy up. But he is a really explosive player. He is somebody that when you don't have a lot, he can find you a bucket. And I'm not saying he's not valuable. It's just like tough to know what he is and what he's going to be. Like, I don't think this is his ceiling, but if he can't become a consistent 3-point shooter, his ceiling isn't all that much higher than what it is now.
No, and I'm not saying that the Warriors are hanging on in hopes that, well, obviously you'd love for him to be a perennial all-star and superstar and all-NBA player. I don't know if that's his future in my mind, but it's like, could he be, if he's your third best player, well, then you might have something. Like at age 26 in a few years, if you hang on to him, if you try and develop him more, you kind of chip away. It's what's been, he's basically just been a mold of clay, very raw mold of clay, and they're trying to form it into something that's productive. And I think they've done a pretty good job of that. For a kid that has come over and played in the G League, basically, didn't have any sort of college experience, and is from a completely different country. Like, I don't think Kuminga's that far away from becoming what he can be, but it doesn't have to be a number one. Like, I think Curry has set our expectations so high as to what you need to be. And it's like, yeah, Kuminga's not going to be a top 10 player of all time.
He also is still 22 years old.
Yeah.
Which, again, newer to basketball and newer to everything. Like, there is reason to believe there is much more in the tank there. And I'm with you. I kind of think at this point with the ankle injury where they're headed, I'm not sure there is a move to be made that's that clear where it warrants trading him. And I was probably more in the camp of like trade him earlier in the season, but at this point, I kind of think you have to take what you have. And what you have is Kuminga. And you say, all right, if it's 30 a year, I guess, for 4 years, we're just going to bet on that because he's 22 and he's averaging 20 points a game. And that counts. That counts for something. Even if at the end of that contract or in the middle of that contract, he doesn't look like he's improving that much, some teams are still going to have interest in him. It's not going to be what the price was. He's not going to be nearly as valuable, but he will have some interest from somebody as a young scoring forward. But what's that ceiling? I don't know, and I'm not sure they do.
No, I think it's impossible to know, but I'm more of the thought that I'm willing to pay to find out. And Eric and Milbray might also be of that same school of thought. Eric, what's going on? You're on Warriors This Week. Good morning.
What's up, guys? Yeah, to me, I say stay the course. All these, supposed fans saying rebuild, they're not going to like it because when you look at examples like Oklahoma City, they're a one-horse team. And remember, guys, they've lost. They were awful for 7 straight years after KD left to be able to accumulate picks and assets, and that's where they currently are. Same with Cleveland. That's not going to fly here, guys. At the end of the day, it is still a business, and Chase Center is going to be empty. You're not going to go 20-62 and just tell your fan base, oh, well, a couple years we're gonna accumulate our picks and start to turn the wave. So that's not Joe Lacob's MO. And so I think right now, we stay the course. Let's just play out the season because I don't want damaged goods, guys. Because Jimmy Butler is at the end of his career, and I'm not paying that guy $60 million a year. Forget it, because he can opt out. You're going to give up a haul, and he's going to want a contract extension, which is why he wants out in Miami. And I pass on him. And the other guy is Zion. Zion is just out of shape. He's never going to be healthy. He never plays. The flash is good when he's rarely there, but the guy's shown he's unprofessional. So pass on him. The one guy I would love to have here, but I think the Bulls don't want Kuminga. I think Vucevic would be perfect. I think he's a big man. He's versatile. He can play both ends, and I think he would be perfect playing off Curry. But I don't think the Bulls want what the Warriors have. So let's just play out the season. Hopefully, try to make the playoffs to stay out of the play-in, and then the offseason is where you make a haul. You can survey the landscape. There are going to be teams looking to make moves, and I think that's where a lot of the big blockbuster deals get done. And so I think that's the best course because I think Joe Lacob has shown he's an aggressive owner. He's all about winning. I think he'll end up eventually locking up Kuminga this offseason, and that's where we make a move to try to reload to contend to make a run, guys. Because forget the rebuilding, because like I mentioned, the two prime examples of Oklahoma City or Cleveland, a couple other teams, you're going to have to lose a lot to acquire the teams, and there's no guarantee you're going to be able to hit. And luckily for OKC, they got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, which the Clippers stupidly gave up for some unforgotten reasons. So you can't bank on that happening. So let's just stay the course, guys. Play out the season, and I think the off season is where the Warriors are going to get really aggressive. Those are my thoughts. Thanks for the time, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to show that just because you acquire a lot of talent doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden going to work. And I think every GM, contradictory to popular belief, would have made the Paul George trade that the Thunder did, because that also meant you were getting Kawhi Leonard. So it was kind of like a package deal. But yeah, and look, the Clippers they've diverted. Like, that's another thing too. It's like I think they offered Paul George a contract, but they decided to let him walk, and they've been better for that. So you can adjust the way that you approach, how you build a roster.
Yeah, and it's the Norman Powell show over there with the Clippers.
Him and Harden play well together.
Yeah, it's funny that Harden had that period where people like it's over, and then he's kind of just hung around doing the same thing. It did feel like he was sort of cooked for a second there, and with the Sixers. But yeah, I think I'm with him in terms of, I do think going into this offseason, it's a time where I think that's where some of the moves get made, because when you're unclear in direction at the trade deadline, you tend to hold pat for the most part. And I think they do want to make moves and they do want to upgrade. But at this point, I do think Kuminga stays, and that's your number one asset. And your number two asset is your draft picks going forward. And how much are you really going to offer for a guy like Nikola Vucevic, who's like not a great defensive center? He can help you space the floor. You could probably play him as you could play him with Draymond. Draymond doesn't, really like that sort of center next to him. But
yeah.
But if it spaces the floor, it could work out. But like the Warriors don't have that much to offer, and the Bulls are a stubborn team that want to compete. Again, it goes back to what we're talking about is there are not that many great moves for the Warriors to make, and when you are directionless and you're sort of just hanging around in that middle ground, it's hard. It's hard to say, all right, we're going to go all in, or we're just going to wait and we're just going to see if we tank. Or I don't think they're gonna ever tank this season. But I do think they could just like hold pat at the trade deadline and not find something that really makes them that much better.
Yeah, no, I think that's the direction it's kind of trending in. But let's wrap up the show with the coach in Vallejo. Sneak him in here before we got to get out of here. Coach, what's going on? Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Good morning, guys. And what I wanted to say, I'm pretty angry, okay? I'm pretty angry when they talk about Kuminga's IQ. There's nothing wrong with his IQ. He's a basketball player. He plays the game his way. He doesn't make any more dumb mistakes than any other player out there. He's smart. He knows how to drive the hoop. He draws fouls better than anyone on the team, okay? Leave the kid alone. When I hear that IQ, that tells me people always say that about athletic black ball players. But Podziemski, he has a great IQ. And it just irks me when people say that. Kuminga is fine. He's the future of the Warriors. And if Kerr would have leaned into him earlier in his career, we wouldn't be in the position we are now. Okay?
Gotcha, Coach. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I don't think Podziemski is like a super high IQ player, but
yeah, I think he's when he gets streaky, he starts to make worse decisions. I say that because it really took a while for him to actually understand what Kerr in the offense is asking of him and how to fit in that, and like it's taken until this year to start to get a feel for that, and maybe that's too harsh to say I don't think he's the highest IQ player. I'm not calling him dumb. I'm saying I mean more in terms of feel in the offense. And maybe IQ is the wrong word for that. I mean more in terms of feel and how to operate in the Warriors offense. I think he doesn't have a great feel for that. So maybe that's a better way to describe it. But that's more what I'm talking about with Kuminga. It's like it's taken them a while. Like Kerr's always had a level of frustration in how they run it. And he's a guy that's better in transition and slows it down and goes ISO. And because he's not a spot-up shooter, doesn't really fit the role of that sort of wing. And so that's part of it. But I think it's that sort of feel, and that takes time. And again, he's a guy that came into the game late, and so that's understandable. So maybe it's feel over IQ, whichever way you describe it. But I'm not calling him a dumb player by any stretch of the imagination.
No, but I also think, too, this idea that if you play players that they'll just get better, I don't subscribe to that either. It goes back to I don't think they would have won a 4 championship with LaMelo Ball. I think if, let's say, Jonathan Kuminga emerges as like a 20-point, 25-point per game scorer this year, or even next season, it's like, well, then he's right on time. Like, he's taken a while. Just because you put James Wiseman's a perfect example. I think the Warriors actually set him back by starting him his first game as a rookie because he wasn't ready. Like, you can't just force things and then because players play, they get better. You might actually hurt their progress and their development. So I think Kuminga is right where he's supposed to be. I think the Warriors believe he's right where he's supposed to be. I think he's an emerging player. He's a nice piece for them. He's a great asset. And they're going to use him either as a player or in a trade. And that's going to be the story that is written about his career. You know, I think the Warriors are in a position right now where they kind of have to hold, to your point, Jake. They got to stand pat because there's not much out there. And it doesn't really look like there's a lot that they want to offer that teams are going to give them a good piece in return for. And in the meantime, they got to go try and beat Toronto. And then, they got to go try and beat Boston. You know, it's like they're going to have to basically just circle this season right now as one that isn't lost, but it's going to be really tough. And there's going to be some games like last night where you see Pat Spencer getting up 12 shots. There's also going to be games like the night before where Curry doesn't shoot well. There's going to be games like Curry has 35.
Yeah, and I think they're going to have to do the thing they've been doing a little bit more, which is looking at the schedule, seeing which games are actually winnable, especially going into the All-Star break where you really want to maximize going into and out of that, the sort of rest you're going to have. Yeah. And so I think they're going to have to look at which games are winnable and try and approach it that way.
Right on. Well, thank you, Jake, for filling in for Dan Devone here on Warriors This Week. Really enjoyed the conversation, seriously.
Happy to be here.
Not an easy conversation to have with a team that's kind of stuck right in the middle. Thank you to the 510. Yep, go Chargers, go. Thank you very much. Big thank you to Stephen Risoto behind the glass. My name is Evan Giddings, saying thank you to everyone that's tuned in, everyone that's called in, everyone that's texted in. We appreciate you getting in, as always, on Warriors This Week. We'll be back at it on Monday on your home for Golden State Warriors basketball, 95.7 The Game. We'll talk to you next time.